This page depicts the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue number 10, and it's a Christmas special from 1997. Big on the cover is Diddy Kong Racing, looking very festive in a Santa hat and cart. Seems like they were proper chuffed to have finished it, whatever that means. Probably the review. They're boasting about a secret packed review, and 16 track maps, which sounds pretty good. Apparently they've even got tips on how to BTT, and Drumstick, whoever they are. Must be characters in the game, I suppose. Looks like a proper reviews bonanza inside. They're calling it the Ultimate Festive Buying Guide. There's a list of games they've reviewed, including Madden 64, Lamborghini Puyo Puyo 64, Duke Nukem 64. That one was a bit controversial even back then if I recall. FIFA World Cup, Chameleon Twist, J-League 11 Beat 97, and NFL Quarterback 98. Quite a mixed bag really, something for everyone. Not all of them were crackers, but a few decent titles in there I reckon. Down the bottom it mentions Japanese and US news and reviews, so they were keeping us up to date with what was happening overseas as well. There are little boxes showing screenshots or adverts for Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Pocket Monsters, which I guess is Pokemon, and something called Nintendo Space World 97, probably a game show. All in all, looks like your typical Christmas issue, trying to get you to spend your Christmas money on games. And for £2.95, not too bad for a bit of reading over the holidays. This page depicts a spread from N64 Magazine. It's the Christmas 1997 issue. On the left, there's a section called How N64 Magazine Works, explaining their editorial stance, independent reviews, UK game focus, and solid news reporting. The main piece is Welcome to N64 Magazine. It sets a Christmas scene with the N64 team supposedly peering out the window waiting for snow. They're chatting about Diddy Kong Racing, pointing out how surprisingly festive it is, mentioning Snowflake Mountain and Walrus Cove tracks, which, DKR was a decent kart racer back then. There's a slight jab at the FIFA 64 debacle, and then a mention of FIFA 98 as if EA are trying to make amends. A bit rich considering FIFA 64. Then, conveniently, snow starts falling in the article, and out come the mince pies and mulled wine, all very seasonal. Jonathan Davies, the editor, signs off with a rather peculiar note about polystyrene packaging for joypads. There's a photo of the N64 team wrapped up warm in the snow holding Christmas presents, and we get a peek at the magazine cover featuring Diddy Kong Racing, issue 10, Christmas 1997 edition. Quite a festive page, all in all. This page is the contents page from issue 10 of N64 Magazine, Christmas 97 issue I reckon. It's got a big contents splashed across the top, can't miss that. Looks like they're plugging Diddy Kong Racing as the main Christmas treat from Rare. Big picture of Diddy and the gang, and it says Rare's Christmas present to N64 owners gets played from start to finish. Bit cheeky, but we all knew Rare were the kings back then, didn't we? Whoa! Then there's a section called N64 Arena, reviewing games as usual. Madden 64 versus NFL Quarterback Club 98, that old chestnut. There can be only one. Or, alright, two. They're saying there's a choice to be made there, but probably most of us would end up with one or the other for our footy fix. Doc Kelly. Automobili Lamborghini, that's in there too. Ridge Racer but on the N64. Or possibly not. Sounds like they're not entirely convinced, maybe it wasn't quite hitting the mark. FIFA 98. Road to the World Cup. It's FIFA, and yet it's fine. What's going on? Bit of a backhanded compliment there, maybe FIFA wasn't always top of the pile then. Duke Nukem 64 is mentioned. Destroy, kill, maim, and make humorous remarks. Yeah, that sounds like Duke alright, bit of mature fun that was. Chameleon Twist, who'd have thought tongues could be such fun? Remember that one? Quite quirky I recall. Or, import arena section for the Japanese and American games they've been looking at. Puyo Puyo Sun 64. This time it rumbles as you grumble. Puzzle game fun from Japan. And J-League 11, Beat 97, further football from our cousins in Japan. So if you were into your Japanese footy games, they had you covered. Warrington also hasn't in Japan. Page numbers are given with yellow circles for each section, starting on page 32 for the N64 Arena, then Diddy Kong Racing on 32 as well, Madden and NFL on 48, Lamborghini on 54, FIFA on 58, Duke Nukem on 60, Chameleon Twist 66, and imports on page 70. All in all, standard contents page stuff, teasing what's inside the mag, and what games to look out for this Christmas. Diddy Kong Racing was definitely the big one everyone was waiting for though. This page from an old N64 mag, probably around Christmas 97, looking at the mention of Christmas throughout, is the contents page, number 5, and it's all about what's inside. Right at the top there is Planet 64 Inches, which is the news section apparently, and the big news is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which at the time was HUGE, everyone was waiting for that one. It says it's on page 6 and they reckon it's looking better and better, with a complete rundown. Then there is N64 How To, which is guides and that sort of thing, starting on page 74. First up in that section, Get Your Head Around Pocket Monsters, which we know as Pokemon now, and they're saying it's massive in Japan. But, bit of typical British skepticism there about crazes from Japan. Next, keep the British end up in GoldenEye 007. GoldenEye, of course, everyone was playing that back then, especially multiplayer. This section is on page 78, and it's about time trials, bonus levels, and odds and ends tidied up. Sounds like tips and tricks for GoldenEye. Then it's Accessorize Your N64, on page 84, all about what to buy for your N64 for Christmas, and what to avoid. Probably steering wheels and rumble packs and memory cards and all that jazz. Triumph repeatedly in Lilac Wars Battle Mode is next, on page 90, Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as the Americans call it. Apparently, there are some subtle tricks to be called upon in the battle mode. That was always a laugh with mates, bombing about in R-Wings. Then there's Tonic Trouble, on page 10. Those French, they say, sounds a bit cheeky. They're working on another platform game and it's weirder than ever. Nooney's got any arms or legs for a start. That's Tonic Trouble alright. A bit odd but quite fun at the time. Forsaken is on page 12. Acclaim will soon give you a chance to drive around killing everything, moving or not. Sounds like a shoot-'em-up driving game, and they reckon the screenshots look blimmin' good. News Center on page 14 is Nintendo Space World 97 previewed. Space World, that was the big Nintendo show in Japan, wasn't it? So, probably some early looks at games we were excited about. Warrant. And finally in the main contents, coming soon, on page 20, the latest pics of and news on N64 games. Standard stuff. Under regulars at the bottom, there's Tips Extra, on page 94, tricks that leaked out of our advice-packed reviews. Club 64 Inches on 102. Christmas communications from the N64 readership. Then subscriptions on 108. Secure your monthly N64 magazine and get a controller free. Always tempting offers like that in mags. Back issues on 109. Had an N64 magazine missing accident? Rectify it here. Directory on 110. Complete guide to everything you could want a guide to. And lastly, N64 magazine issue 11 inches on page 114. Find out what'll fill the first N64 magazine of 1998. So they're already plugging the next issue, key. That's the page then, a quick rundown of what was in N64 magazine issue 10, Christmas 1997. Good times. This page is all about the massive upcoming game for the N64, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. It's billed as the giant guide to the biggest game of 1998, although it was late 1997 when this magazine came out, so we were all properly hyped for 98. They're going on about how Ocarina of Time might sound a bit weird as a title, especially compared to the Japanese name, but reckon it'll stick. They compare the ocarina to a harmonica and flute, which is a bit of a stretch, but hey, it's Zelda. The article bangs on about how Zelda is going to be the big star of the Nintendo Space World show in Tokyo, even more important than Super Mario 64 in Japan, and that Nintendo really needed a role-playing game to take on Final Fantasy V-2 on the PlayStation, which was obviously massive at the time. They're really pushing that this Zelda game will be the most spectacular adventure ever on the N64. There are a few screenshots dotted around showing Link in some 3D environments. One screenshot shows Link fighting some Stalfos skeletons, another is in a temple-like setting with some pots and stuff, and another shows him in a forest-type area. The captions are pretty enthusiastic. One says the 3D graphics will be a huge leap from the old 2D Zelda games, and points out the columns, like we're all amazed by some polygonal pillars. Another reckons the combat will be spectacular with complex weapons and violent clashes, which sounds a bit much for Zelda, but alright ZY, calm down. Down at the bottom there's a section called Lights, talking about the game's lighting effects. Apparently they haven't seen much real-time lighting yet, but the screenshots suggest it's going to be good. They mention spooky glows, shadows cast on the ground, torches making light pools, and even lava glowing menacingly. They're saying it's all going to be really atmospheric and a big departure from Mario 64's cartoon style, which was fair enough. Mario was bright and colorful, Zelda looked like it was going for something a bit darker and more serious, which for the time seemed pretty impressive. Another caption under a dark screenshot talks about magical shimmering and glowing flames and hard shadows, saying the lighting will be like nothing seen before in a game. Again, bit hyped up, but we were all pretty excited to see what it would look like. This page depicts a feature titled Future Look, focusing on The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It's talking about the camera system in the game, comparing it to Mario 64. Apparently Miyamoto reckons the camera in Mario 64 was revolutionary for its time, always giving you the best view, and they're promising similar camera advancements for Zelda. They're saying in Zelda the camera will be partly player controlled but also automatic, zooming in for weapons and going to a bird's eye view in rooms. One of the little text boxes mentions tricky jumping bits and how the camera zooms out to help judge gaps, and another talks about a from-above view like the old 2D Zelda games, which sounds interesting. A bit of a mix then. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows Link fighting some weird blue tornado thing, another has him in a lava-filled area with those blocky N64 graphics, and there's another one of a room from above that looks properly old-school Zelda-like. There's also a picture of Link up close looking a bit moody, with a skeleton dude behind him. They mention the N64 taking over for cutscenes, which I suppose is standard these days. I'm wondering how the C buttons will be used for views, which we'll have to wait and see about. Japanese release is down as early 1998, and US/UK release is still TBA. Typical. Go, go! It says at the bottom, very enthusiastic. Christmas 1997 issue, so they're getting us all hyped up for Zelda then. Fair enough. Wonder if ZY, the reviewer, was impressed. Probably was. Everyone was back then, wasn't they? This page depicts a preview of the new Zelda game, the one for the N64, looks like it's called Ocarina of Time. Right then, so Action is the title, and it seems they're properly excited about it. They're banging on about how it's going to be bursting with battles, exotic locations and mystical powers. Typical magazine hype, isn't it? Woof! They're making a big deal about the monsters you'll be fighting, saying Link's never had baddies like this before. Skeletons, floating monks floating about. Sounds a bit odd. Golden knights, red jellyfish, lizardmen, and even a giant underwater spider. Blimey, sounds like a right menagerie. Apparently, Link will have a decent set of tools to deal with them, like an axe, bombs and a shield. Good job too, facing all that lot. There's some chat about the plot, the usual Zelda stuff I suppose. The Triforce is in danger, Ganon is up to no good, and Link has to save Hyrule. Zelda and a wise man are giving him advice, so he's not completely on his own at least. They mention this fairy tree too, which is apparently dying. Bit grim. Gorint, travel through time, they're shouting next. Seems like this ocarina thing is more important than just playing a tune. Something about blowing into it to travel through time, and you end up with two Links, Big Link and Little Link. Sounds a bit convoluted, but we'll see how it plays out, they're shouting neck. The reviewer, ZY, is pointing out all sorts of things in the screenshots like, is that blood splattering from Link's sword? In a Nintendo game? Surely not, they say, with a bit of sarcasm. They're also going on about a Triforce symbol that looks like an R2-D2 projection, and making a point that Link is left-handed, as if that's some big revelation. And they're saying there are flying enemies too, which you couldn't do properly in the old 2D Zelda games. Point taken. So yeah, it's Zelda in 3D, looks like it could be alright I suppose, if you're into that sort of thing. Lots of monsters to bash, puzzles to solve, saving the world, the usual Zelda fare. We'll see if it lives up to all this magazine hype when it finally comes out. This page in N64 Magazine is all about The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which, back then, we were all properly buzzing about. It's shouting, see graphics like you've never seen before, which to be fair, looking at those screenshots now, they were pretty impressive for the time, especially on the N64. They're going on about the variety of locations, you know, deserts, dungeons, all that good stuff. They even mention, Link is more detailed than Lara Croft, which was a bold claim in '97. Then there's a section about riding a horse. They're making a bit of a joke about girls liking horses, but yeah, everyone wanted to ride around Hyrule on horseback, pretending to be Zorro. Apparently it's the first Zelda game where you can properly ride a horse in some old Capcom game, Dynasty Wars, which I can't even remember. They're showing screenshots of Link getting on and off the horse, calling it Winnie. Bit cringe that. Next up, count the megabits. They're banging on about the game being massive, a whopping 32 megabyte cartridge, which was twice the size of Gambare Goemon. They were originally aiming for even bigger, 128 megabits. But even 32 was a big deal back then. They're saying Miyamoto is cramming loads in, monsters and special effects. And because of cheaper cartridges, it's not going to cost a fortune, only about 40 quid, which was still a fair whack. Horisai. There's talk about a 64DD version as well. Apparently Ocarina of Time will be the first Zelda on the N64, but they're also planning a different version for the 64DD add-on, which was supposed to be more exploration-based. Remember the 64DD? Didn't exactly set the world on fire, did it? Kiyu. Then there's a wait a bit longer section, which is a bit of a downer. It's saying Zelda is delayed again, won't be out until late February now, after Yoshi's story. They reckon it'll be summer before we see it in the UK. Always the way, wasn't it? But they're saying it's going to be worth the wait, the most enthralling and most downright enormous N64 game so far. We could only hope so, eh? Finally, there's a bit about the ocarina, obviously. They're explaining what an ocarina is, a little clay flute, and how they've been around for ages, even used in World War II. Apparently you can hear one in California, Dreamin' and Wild Thing, and even the good, the bad and the ugly theme. And there's a little picture of Link pointing at the ocarina, looking a bit miserable. They reckon a tune would cheer him up. Probably right. Right at the bottom it says to be continued. And they'll be playing Zelda at Space World in Tokyo, and we'll have a full report in the next issue. Exciting times. Christmas 97, waiting for Zelda. Good times. This page in the mag is all about Tonic Trouble, which Ubisoft are touting as the next big 3D platformer since Mario 64. They're making a big deal about how good it looks, claiming these screenshots were taken on a top-end PC, but assuring us it'll still look decent on the N64, which is good news, innit? Hey. The game's about this purple fella called Ed, who's a bit of a clumsy cleaner who accidentally drops toxic gunk from space onto Earth, which naturally falls into the wrong hands. So Ed's got to sort it all out. Apparently he's quite versatile in game terms, able to run, jump, swim, climb and even wear disguises, which sounds like they're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. The reviewer, ZY, reckons Tonic Trouble is going to be good, praising the animation and interactive conduct, whatever that means. They think it'll be a decent platformer to look forward to next May. Rayman gets a mention too, as another Ubisoft platformer, just to remind us they've done this sort of thing before. It all sounds promising enough, but let's face it, everyone was saying their platformer was the next Mario 64 back then, weren't they? We'll see if this one lives up to the hype, or if it's just another game with a silly name. This page depicts a preview of the game Tonic Trouble from Ubisoft. It's part of a section called Future Look. Tonic Trouble. Yeah, I remember seeing bits and bobs about this in magazines back in the day. Christmas 97, wow, that was a while ago now, wasn't it? The page is titled, Looks Like Trouble, which is a bit of wordplay on the game's name, I suppose. Very clever. They're showing off some of the characters from the game, saying these are 4 of their favourites out of 40. Blimey, 40 characters. Let's see, we've got the storyteller, who they reckon looks a bit like Will, whoever Will is, and he'll be doing the story bits, makes sense. Then there's the knight, a medieval warrior type, apparently with no arms or legs. Bit useless for a knight, isn't he? Next up is the nut. Seems like they're taking the mickey out of him a bit, saying Tim wants dungarees like him but they won't let him because it'll make his bum look big. Alright then. And finally, Death, who they reckon Ubisoft's artists can draw, even if they can't manage arms or legs, which is a bit harsh, isn't it? They're joking about them being able to do skeletal Grim Reapers though. Warrinja. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows Ed, this purple worm thing, on a sloped surface, and the caption says he keeps on smiling no matter how steeply the terrain is inclined. Another one shows a purple character on a checkered floor, they say. Not much adventuring to be done here, but he looks like he's just spotted something exciting off stage. And then there's another scene with a few of these characters in a sort of 3D world. They say, lovely, eh? But if the actual game ends up looking like this, we'll cough up all our Christmas pudding. Bit dramatic, aren't they? Pia. At the bottom it says to be continued. And, expect regular Tonic Trouble updates in N64 Magazine over the months to come. So they were clearly planning to cover it in more detail in future issues. Christmas 1997, N64 Magazine. Yeah, those were the days. Always eager for any info on upcoming N64 games, weren't we? Tonic Trouble. I think I vaguely remember it, probably got overshadowed by all the Mario and Zelda stuff coming out around that time. Still, always good to see what else was on the horizon. This page depicts an exclusive first look at Forsaken on the N64. It's from issue 10 of N64 Magazine, back in Christmas of 97. Right then, everyone was buzzing about what was coming next on the N64, weren't they? This article is previewing Forsaken, saying despite what we might have thought, it's not Probe doing the N64 version, but Iguana UK, the Shadowman lot. Apparently Probe were doing the PC and PlayStation versions, and Iguana were left to their own devices with the N64 one, which they reckon will make the 64-bit version different, and hopefully better, than the others. Bit of console war starting there already, eh? The game itself sounds like your typical futuristic shooter, story about scavengers on a ruined Earth looking for resources, all thanks to some sinister company. Gameplay-wise, it's all about tunnels, called Tunnel B1 here, with hoverbikes, and the usual powerful weapons. They're banging on about labyrinthine levels, From mines to Arctic mazes. Sounds like they're aiming for a bit of variety there then. It mentions single-player and four-player split screen, which was always a laugh back in the day, wasn't it? They're quite excited about the game, intelligently adjusting the difficulty, easier routes if you're rubbish, harder ones if you're good. That's a clever idea, I suppose. They also mention a missile cam, like Shadows of the Empire had, and real-time lighting and flares, 360-degree movement and all that jazz. Standard stuff for shooters at the time, but they're acting like it's revolutionary. And of course they are saying it looks amazing, without needing a fancy 3D FX card. Probably looked alright on a CRT back then, to be fair. The reviewer ZY, or Zai, as we're told to pronounce it, seems to think it could be another hit for Acclaim. We'll see, eh? Remember being hyped for loads of games back then? Some were good, some weren't. Forsaken, yeah, vaguely remember that one. Always another shooter, wasn't there? This page in Planet N64 Magazine is doing a feature called Future Look, and they're taking a look at Forsaken. It's being called a Death Race 2000 style game, which sounds a bit dramatic. They're highlighting the graphics, saying they're already looking amazing, which for the N64 at the time, I suppose they were pretty impressive. There are a few screenshots showing some futuristic tunnels and vehicles. Looks a bit like Descent if I'm honest, but maybe with more hovercraft. Apparently, up to 4 players can play, which is always a bonus. Back in '97, there's a section titled Gunning for Gory, listing a bunch of weapon names like Pulsar, Pyrolite Rifle, Beam Laser. All very sci-fi sounding. They even mention a sus gun, which they describe as a smart bomb. Sounds like they've gone all out on the arsenal. Release-wise, it seems Forsaken is due out in the UK and worldwide in March '98, and they're saying maybe April or May for the PC version. So, it's a little way off, but they're getting a preview in early. Probably to get us all hyped up for Christmas. To be continued, it says at the bottom. So I guess there's more to come in future issues. Standard preview piece really. Building up the excitement for a game that might be decent, might be a bit naff, we'll have to wait and see. This page depicts a look at the upcoming Nintendo Space World 97 event. It's from issue 10 of N64 Magazine, the Christmas '97 issue, so you know it's from back in the day when we were all chuffed about the N64. The article is titled Space Up, and it's all about the Nintendo Space World show taking place in Japan in November. Apparently it's a massive deal, the biggest Nintendo show in the world. The magazine guys are saying it's essential to see what Nintendo is up to and to keep their image shiny. They reckon Nintendo are keeping their cards close to their chest, but they still managed to cobble together a preview of what we can expect, which is good of them. They mention it's organized by Nintendo themselves to show off their own stuff, without other manufacturers getting in the way. Unlike those big game shows, Sega and Sony usually have their own events too, so it sounds like Nintendo wanted their own limelight. Chulwoo. The big thing they're talking about is the 64DD, Nintendo's disk drive add-on, which we were all waiting for back then. Apparently it was shown before its Shoshinkai, which was Space World's old name, running Super Mario 64 from a disc. This time, they are expecting to see a near-complete version of the 64DD and are hoping for a glimpse of the launch games like Pocket Monster 64, Mario Artist, SimCity 64, and Mother 3. Remember Mother 3? Never actually saw that one here in Blighty, did we? They are also excited about Zelda 64, which is now called The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. They've only seen static pictures and video footage so far, and they're wondering about the graphics compared to Mario and Star Fox, the music, and how controlling a horse with the analog stick will be. Good questions, to be fair. We were all wondering the same thing. Chas. The article promises full details in the next issue after they get back from Tokyo. So typical mag stuff, building the hype and making sure you buy the next issue. There's a little pic of a Pocket Monster ticket as well, looks like they were giving those away at the show, and a photo of some of the stands. Pretty basic compared to modern shows, but back then it was cutting edge stuff apparently. Oh, and just before I forget, some of the people who worked on the mag at the time are listed. Jonathan Davies was the editor, Will Overton was the art editor, and someone called Z.Y. Nicholson or Zy Nicholson was a contributor. There are loads of other names listed too for all sorts of roles, but you get the idea, it was a team effort. This page depicts a typical news spread from an N64 mag back in the day. There's a bit about RPGs, something about concerned parents, probably tutting about violence, as usual. A very cheery picture of Mario slapped on there for good measure, looking like he's just won the lottery. Then we get the main headline in massive letters, Your Life. Very dramatic. Underneath that, there's a picture of the N64 console itself, and one of those chunky cartridges. Classic bit of kit, wasn't it? And a moody-looking screenshot from Zelda, Ocarina of Time. That was the big one everyone was waiting for, wasn't it? They say it's going to be a star of the show, along with the 64DD, Nintendo really pushing those two things to save the day in Japan. Gaka. There's a bit with Nintendo boss Hiroshi Yamauchi, looking very serious, saying he's going to talk about the future of the N64, which is always interesting, especially as we were all wondering where it was going next. Then there's a Team 64 predictions bit, where the magazine staff are putting their necks on the line and guessing what Nintendo will announce at Space World 98. James reckons on a price drop and ejectable controller packs. Tim wants to see a playable 02. Paul is praying there won't be a Mario Kart 64 2-bit. Harsh Paul, it was good fun. Jess thinks there will be new packs on show. Jonathan is going for a 64DD price of around £50 with a free game. Will thinks Pocket Monsters 64 will link with the Game Boy game that's Pokemon to you and me these days, and Andrea thinks Mario Kart 64 2 will have Koopa Troopa and tweaked battle arenas. Finally, ZY, who's always a bit of a dreamer, reckons we might get a sneaky peek at Super Mario 64 2. Bold claims all round, weren't they? BD. Lastly, there's a list of games to watch out for. It's a right mixed bag, this. You've got things like Aero Gauge, Augusta Masters 98 for the golf fans, Banjo-Kazooie, which looked amazing at the time, Chameleon Twist, never heard of that one catching on really, Diddy Kong Racing was a big one, and Dual Heroes, F-Zero X for the speed freaks, and Famista 64. Then Fighters Destiny, Flying Dragon Fist Twin, GASP, Fighters NEX Extreme, Hexen, Holy Magic Century, Lamborghini 64, Morita Shogi 64. Some of these are getting a bit obscure now. Nagano Winter Olympics, NBA Basketball and NBA. In the Zone 98 for the sports fans, then Pro Baseball King 2, Pro Mahjong 64, Reverend Limit, SimCity 2000, Snowspeeder, Snowboarding Snowbo Kids, Sonic Wings Assault, Super Robot Spirits, Tamagotchi 64, Tokon Road, Top Gear Rally, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey, Wild Choppers, Yoshi's Story, which was another big Nintendo title, and of course The Legend of Zelda, The Ocarina of Time again, 64 Detective Team and 64 Uzumo to finish it off. Quite a list really. Looking back, some of those were classics, some were alright, and some you completely forgot existed. That's Christmas 97 for you on the N64, lots to look forward to, and lots of wishful thinking going on. This page from the N64 Mag, issue 10 it is, covers a few bits and bobs. There's a piece called Rolling In It, talking about how well Nintendo were doing in Japan in the first half of 97. Apparently they clocked up a fair bit of dosh, even though the N64 was supposedly struggling a bit against the PlayStation over there. They reckon it was all down to the Game Boy, and Pocket Monsters was mentioned, which I guess is Pokemon for us Brits. Then there's a bit called Say Cheese, which is like their funny photo of the month. It's some bloke who looks a bit like the villain Jaws from James Bond, with a couple of birds and a GoldenEye 007 game in a shop called Comet. Cheeky, promoting their own games like that. The main bit on the page is all about new accessories under the heading, New Goods Accessorize. They're reviewing a couple of third-party controllers, the MakoPad and the SuperPad. The MakoPad, made by Interact, looks a bit like the standard Nintendo pad but purple. They reckon it's not bad, feels similar to the official SuperPad 64, and has all the usual buttons and triggers. Apparently it even got a seal of quality from Nintendo, which was a bit of a surprise for a third-party pad back then. They weren't too keen on the slow motion and auto-fire buttons, mind you, but still gave it a decent 84%. It was £25, which was a fair whack for a pad at the time. Next up is the SuperPad, also from Interact and also £25. They're a bit confused by the name, saying there were already loads of pad names kicking about. They reckon it's alright, a solid controller, shaped a bit like the Shark Pad, and the buttons and stick are decent. But they thought the plastic felt a bit cheap compared to the Shark Pad, and it wasn't quite as good value as the MakoPad. They marked it down to 72%. They mention a load of daft pad names, like Radpad, Piranapad and even Bachelorpad. Tim must have had a laugh with those. Lastly, there's a piece about Super Mario 64 2. Blimey, we were all gagging for that, weren't we? Apparently Miyamoto himself was talking about it just before Space World. He said Luigi was going to be in it, which was great news, and they were thinking about two-player mode. He didn't sound too sure about the two-player yet, but even the thought of Luigi in Mario 64 2 was enough to get you excited. He also mentioned a new snowboarding game, like a winter wave race, which sounded interesting enough, and that Nintendo had about 30 games in development. Christ, remember waiting for games back then? It felt like forever. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine kicks off with a competition to win a Duke Nukem action figure, which, to be fair, back then was probably quite exciting for some lads. They were making a bit of a fuss about opening a jiffy bag and pretending it might be a real Duke Nukem. Bit daft really. Newty. Then there's an article talking about Mario Artist. Apparently some Japanese magazine had been chatting with Nintendo's Yoshio Hongo, and it seems Nintendo were cooking up more than just the one Mario Artist game. They reckoned there were about 3 similar titles in development. They were showing Mario Artist at Space World, And Hongo mentioned they were even looking into an N64 mouse and printer to go with it. A printer for the N64, can you imagine? Seems a bit overkill now, doesn't it? Warrington no. Below that, it's the finalists for the Electronics Boutique Lilac Wars Championship, or Star Fox 64, as we knew it. Seems like people were really hammering away at that game. We've got Gary Kerr from Darlington, who managed 1971 hits, Gavin Cole and Jonathan Cole, both from Washington with cracking scores, and top of the pile is Patrick Wessels from Rotterdam with an amazing 2041 hits. Good on them. Do goal. Finally, on the right, there's the N64 board, the letters page. Alex Lilly sent in a picture of Fox McCloud, looking heroic apparently. Andre Tonneson from Norway got a mention for sending in a Mario picture. Someone called Eddie of Chester sent in a Mario Kart scene. And Damien Whittle of Blackbrook got a shout out for sending in some anime cell from Akira. Looks like the usual reader submissions, plenty of Mario and Lilac Wars stuff as you'd expect. They were even asking for more reader contributions, wanting things to fill up the blank space. Standard magazine filler really. This page showcases an article from a gaming magazine called Planet 64, issue 10, and is all about upcoming N64 games. The main headline is Merry Fi, and underneath it says Art Attack. The main feature is about a game called GASP, Fighters Next Dream, developed by Konami for the 64M cartridge. The article starts by mentioning that beat-em-ups haven't been that great on the N64 so far, with dodgy voice acting and developers not quite hitting the mark. But GASP, Fighters NEXTREAM, which they say is a working title, is shaping up nicely. It's described as Konami's first proper beat-em-up since the Turtle games, and it's been in development for a couple of months. The article talks about the Create Characters feature as being a big deal, allowing players to customize their fighter's look and fighting style. They mention it's a bit like NBA Hangtime in terms of attributes. The reviewer, ZY, comments on how you can adjust the speed and reaction levels, letting you tailor the difficulty. There will be environmental interactions like boxes and drain pipes, which sounds a bit like Final Fight. Apparently, there are also real-time animated intros for each character. There are screenshots showing off the game. One shows a versus screen with what look like character creation options, or maybe just character selection. Another screenshot shows some in-game action, a character in yellow trousers doing a spinning kick, and another of two characters fighting in front of some hazard signs. The reviewer mentions the graphics seem alright, and they're impressed with the secret characters Konami is promising. Besides GASP, Fighters NEXTREAM, there's a list on the side of other games featured this month, including Fighters Destiny, Super Robot Spirits, Duel Heroes, Mortal Kombat 4, Street Fighter 64, Body Harvest, SimCity 2000, Spooky and NBA in the Zone 98. It's a good mix of genres there, covering fighting, robots, sports, and even a bit of spooky action for the N64. They're hyping GASP, Fighters NEXTREAM, for a UK release in summer 98, after a March 98 release in Japan. It's suggested this new Konami fighter might be a Tekken beater, which is quite a bold claim for back then. This page depicts a preview section from a gaming magazine. Looks like it's building up the hype for Christmas back in '97 must be. It's all about Planet 64 previews, and it's talking about a few games coming to the Nintendo 64. First up, there's a section called Fighters Destiny, or Fighters Destiny. It used to be called Struggle Hard apparently, which sounds a bit rubbish. They're saying it's getting better each time they see it. Looks like they've found some new stuff in the options, including the ability to have a cow in the game, literally. There's a screenshot of a fighter whacking a cow, which is a bit daft, but probably funny for a laugh back then. The reviewer, ZY, thinks the rodeo move is a unique thing about the game. They seem quite keen on this Fighters Destiny now, saying, Fighting Cup ought to be a pleasant play. Then there's a bit called Eager Punch and Kick Waiting, about other fighting games. First, Super Robot Spirits. Sounds like some Japanese robot fighter. They say it's got robots drawn from anime, and it's got moves like Drunken Fist. It's coming from Japan first, naturally. They seem to think it looks promising. Then there's Duel Heroes, from Hudson, who did Bomberman and stuff. They reckon it was a bit glitchy at E3, and they're not completely convinced yet. They're giving it the benefit of the doubt, but aren't totally sold. Next up is Mortal Kombat 4. Big deal back then, of course. They are saying Midway are doing the N64 version, and it'll be different from the Japanese version, and closer to the arcade game, which is good news. They're talking about thrashing, steaming great baseball bats about the head. Sounds very Mortal Kombat. They think the conversion has already got past the trauma of Mortal Kombat Trilogy, which was a bit of a mess on the N64 if I remember right. So they're cautiously optimistic about MK4. Finally, there's a tiny mention of Street Fighter 64. Not much news, just saying Capcom will probably do a version with characters from all the Street Fighter games. They reckon it'll be more like the PlayStation Street Fighter action, which was probably a good thing for the time. They're saying it's definitely the beat-em-up to look out for, but not getting too hyped up about it. Overall, it's a preview of what fighting games were on the horizon for the N64 for Christmas '97. Fighter's Destiny seems to be the surprise package, with the usual suspects like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter also on the way, though maybe with a bit of understandable skepticism around conversions of arcade hits back then. This page from N64 Magazine looks like we're having a gander at a couple of upcoming games, Body Harvest and SimCity 2000. First up, Body Harvest. Blimey, remember that one? It was DMA design back then, now Rockstar North of course, and they were big news after Grand Theft Auto on the PC, so expectations were fairly high. Seems like they were messing about with it, going from a shooter to an RPG, and then back again, a bit indecisive maybe. The reviewer Zai reckons Nintendo might know what they're doing. Always good to have faith, eh? The screenshots show some rather large green insect-like blighters, and some vehicles, a bit WW1 triplane looking thing there too. Huge great insects according to the caption, all games should have them. Bit of a bold statement there. Then there's SimCity 2000, for the N64 Imagineer are doing this one. Now SimCity, that's a classic, wasn't sure we needed it on the N64 though, the SNES version was already pretty decent. They reckon it's going to be better than the SNES version, exploiting the N64's hires mode. Whatever difference that will actually make to a city builder, I'm not sure. Looks detailed, if frighteningly similar to the SNES version, the caption says. Bit of a backhanded compliment that. They're talking about building horse racing tracks, and betting on the Geegees. Alright for some I suppose. Aliens invading, and factories and pollution too. Keeping it cheerful then. Release dates are down as spring '98 for both in the UK, Japan's getting them a bit earlier as usual. Sounds like a decent enough pair of games to look forward to, if you're into that sort of thing. This page depicts a couple of game previews and some rumour mill stuff from back in the day. Shall we? First up we've got Ice Cold, which is about a game called Spooky. Sounds a bit like they were trying to cash in on the whole horror craze at the time. Developed by a UK studio called ICE. Apparently they did Total Carnage on the SNES and Amiga, which were alright I suppose. This spooky game is meant to be dark and violent with piggly monsters. You play some leotard-wearing bloke who can shapeshift into different monsters to collect mirror pieces. Sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? The reviewer, ZY, mentions 30 pieces of mirror to find and some evil arch-morph character. Screenshots are properly dark and gloomy, lots of blue and black, very moody. They reckon it's got a comic book feel, which I guess could be alright. Why? Then we've got the Red Zone section, talking about NBA in the Zone 98 for the N64. It's from Konami. The reviewer is moaning about the graphics being fuzzy, which to be fair, a lot of early 3D games were a bit rough around the edges. They're showing some screenshots of the basketball game, and yeah, it does look a bit blurry. They mention 300 individual moves, so it sounds like it could be deep gameplay-wise even if it's not the prettiest. They are joking about the courts needing work and looking a bit like a basket lake, whatever that means. Seems like they're not blown away by it visually. Lastly, there's an ear to the ground bit, which is like the rumour section. Iguana are working on Wrecking Balls, a platform puzzler, sounding a bit like Putty Squad. Talk about Metroid 64, saying DMA Design, who were doing Body Harvest, were in line for it, but Nintendo might not let anyone but their own devs do it. DMA Design, they later became Rockstar North, didn't they? Argonaut, who did Buck Bumble, have signed with Ubisoft to publish it. Midway are doing another racing arcade game, Off-Road Racing. FIFA 99 is already in development, after FIFA 98 did well. And apparently new Banjo-Kazooie screenshots have leaked from Rare, which is always good news if you're a Rare fan. They reckon it looks lovely, hoping for another Rare treat. Sounds promising, that Banjo game. This page showcases some RPG news for the N64, promising good things for role-playing fans in the new year. It looks like Konami are bringing over Gomon, dropping the Gambar bit from the title, which is probably sensible for us Brits. And Imagineer are releasing Holy Magic Century in Europe. Gomon is described as a 3D world hidden, a bit like Mario 64, but with multiple characters and weapons. They're saying it's got a mad storyline, which could be interesting or just plain bonkers. We'll have to wait and see. Apparently Konami were a bit slow on the uptake getting Goemon sorted, but finally got around to it, which is good news. Holy Magic Century sounds like a more traditional action RPG, set in Europe in medieval times, dealing with the 7 deadly sins, which sounds a bit grown-up for Nintendo, doesn't it? They mention magic and elemental attacks, so the usual fantasy tropes are probably in there. Neither game has a firm release date, just early '98. There's a section called Ask Fusoya, which is a bit of reader Q&A. Someone's asking about the 64DD and whether games could rewrite sections of the game on the fly, and Fusoya thinks that's a bit far-fetched, pointing out the memory limitations compared to PlayStation discs. Another reader is asking about a sequel to Secret of Mana on the SNES, and the third game in the Soul Blazer series Terranigma. Fusoya says the Mana sequel never came out here, sadly, and reckons Terranigma is a cracking action RPG, giving it a hypothetical 90%, comparing it to Illusion of Time, which was a good game back in the day. It finishes off with Fusoya saying he's off for some mulled wine and cheesy footballs. Sounds like a proper Christmas to me. And a reminder to send in your questions to N64 Magazine down in Bath. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 10, looks like it's from Christmas 1997. It kicks off with an article called An Englishman in Tokyo, which is about how Christmas is celebrated in Japan. Or rather, not really celebrated in the same way as back home in the UK. It mentions that Japan is mostly Buddhist and Shinto, so Christmas isn't a big religious thing, but they do get into the commercial side of things with lights and cakes, and it sounds a bit like Valentine's Day with women giving presents to men. They even have drinking parties for single people at Christmas. Sounds a bit sad if you ask me. There's a little Learn Japanese box, teaching you how to say, Happy Christmas, Merry Kurisumasu, Happy New Year, and other festive phrases, which is a bit of fun. Then there's a section called Dear Santa, where the writer, Max Everingham, is writing a Christmas wish list. He mentions going to the Tokyo Game Show and being excited by some new tech. He's dreaming of a skateboarding peripheral for the N64, because he's a fan of Sega's Top Skater, and wants a similar game on the N64, plus a skateboard controller. He also fancies a motion sensor for the N64, so you can play sports games like basketball and javelin. Apparently Mitsubishi were working on something called artificial retina tech, which sounds very futuristic for back then. Finally, he's after a computer with a phone built in, complaining about having too many gadgets, and wanting it all in one. There's a picture of a massive telly, a 29-inch monster, that his wife bought him for gaming, and it's showing GoldenEye 007. The reviewer, ZY, is joking that the N64 team are looking forward to Crimbo cards. Ah, simpler times. This page showcases the N64 Arena section from what looks like an old N64 magazine, issue 10 to be precise. It's got a big splash image of Diddy Kong racing, proclaiming it as Rare's Christmas corker, and suggesting it's better than Mario Kart, which were fighting words back then, weren't they? We all had opinions on that one. Below that, there's the N64 Arena Guide to Scoring. It explains how they review games and award scores, and it's all based on percentages, you know, proper old school magazine stuff. At the top end, 85% and above, that's star game territory. The reviewer Zai and the team must have really loved those ones, proper top tier games. Then you have 84% to 70%, still cracking games. Jolly good fun, they say. Definitely worth a look for your collection, especially with how expensive N64 cartridges were. Between 69% and 50%, it's a bit more lukewarm, perfectly playable, but not really special, maybe good for a rental back in the day if Blockbuster still existed. Then 49% down to 20% is where things get dodgy, lazily programmed, or just plain bad ideas, games you'd probably avoid unless you were really desperate for something to play. And right at the bottom, 19% to 0%, they say they've never seen a game that bad, and hopefully never will, but if they do, it's ruthless punishment apparently. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? Looking back, it's funny how seriously these magazines took their scoring. Good times though, flicking through these pages back in the day, deciding what to nag your parents for Christmas. This page from N64 Magazine must be the Christmas 97 issue by the look of it. Core, takes you right back. At the top we've got the inevitable footy game Face-Off, Madden 64 against NFL Quarterback Club, 98, always the same two battling it out for Christmas #1. Then there's Automobili Lamborghini, sounds a bit posh that, doesn't it? Crazy name they say, and they're probably spot on. Looks like a driving game from the picture, all flashy motors. Then there's the Import Arena section, which is all about games coming in from the States and Japan, games like Puyo Puyo Sun 64 and J-League 11 Beat 97. Japanese games, always a bit mental, weren't they? Down at the bottom left, how it works, where they explain their review system, things like visuals, sounds and all that jazz. Over on the right, Team 64. Looks like a bit of fun with the reviewers there, Jonathan Davies complaining about the cold, Andrea Ball threatening to give them a whack if they don't get on with writing, Paul Jarrold's only asking for pot noodles for Christmas, Jess Bickham's into pizza, Zy Nicholson apparently forgets to do his reviews, and Tim Weaver's getting the rage with FIFA. They've picked their game of the month for each of them, like Puyo Puyo 64, Chameleon Twist, Automobili Lamborghini, Duke Nukem 64, Diddy Kong Racing and FIFA. Yeah, typical N64 mag page, showing off the new games and giving us their verdict. Good times. This page depicts a full-page spread, looks like it's from N64 Magazine, issue 10 it says down there. And blimey, it's all about Diddy Kong Racing, remember that one? Big orange letters, can't miss it. They're really going for it here, calling it a giant fun-fur nuclear missile, coming out of Rare. Bit much, even for then, but you get the idea they were excited. You've got Diddy Kong himself front and center in his little cart, and then there's that tiger fella in a plane, and the frog in a hovercraft thing, and even what looks like a big red cat head in the background. They were really pushing the vehicle variety, weren't they? Seems like they're saying it's gonna devastate the Christmas games charts. Bold claim. But yeah, everyone was waiting to see what Rare were gonna do next after Donkey Kong Country, so Diddy Kong Racing was definitely one to watch at the time, especially in the run-up to Christmas '97. They reckon they're the first to play it right through to the end, so it's definitely a preview piece. Typical magazine stuff. Get in there first and tell everyone how great it is. This page depicts a spread from N64 Magazine, must be from around Christmas '97 going by the cover date blurb. It's all about Diddy Kong Racing, that Rare game, and it's billed as the official program, which is a bit much, isn't it? It's got that Badger Chap bumper on the left, looking rather pleased with himself next to a big N64 Star Game badge, so they clearly rated it. On the right there's a contents list, breaking down the feature into sections like the drivers, the vehicles, driving techniques, power-ups, all the usual stuff, each helpfully pointing you to a page number. All page 34 apparently, except for the tracks and race organization bits. It teases tracks like Dino Domain, Snowflake Mountain, Sherbet Island, and Dragon Forest, which sound like your typical cutesy kart racer locations. Then there's future Funland tracks, and multiplayer events, and time trials covering all bases then. Finally, the verdict is promised on page 47, where they presumably tell you if it's actually any good. Down below, there's some text about welcoming you to Adventure Island for the N64 Grand Prix racing. Apparently, the weather's wonderful, ideal for cartoon rodents, reptiles, felines and primates to race. Sounds like a right old menagerie, doesn't it? It mentions morning practice was eventful, when someone from the rodent team called Pipsy had a puncture and skidded into a passing brontosaurus. Health and safety clearly wasn't top of the list back then. They reckon the Diddy Kong meet will be a long one, at least 60 hours apparently, which seems a bit of an exaggeration even for a kart racer. They're keen to see the 5 giants, a walrus, triceratops, octopus, dragon and boar, and admit that if they're wrong about being ready to go live to the races, then they are very much mistaken. Right then, below that there's the usual game info box, Diddy Kong Racing, Rare/Nintendo, out now. It needs 96 MB of memory, supports 1 to 4 players, and uses the controller pack, cartridge backup, and rumble pack. Standard N64 stuff really for a decent game at the time. There's even a little ad for Interact controllers at the bottom, probably trying to flog you some extra joypads for multiplayer mayhem. All in all, it's a pretty standard preview page for a big N64 release in the run-up to Christmas. Lots of promises and hype for what was probably a decent karting game, though whether it lived up to Mario Kart 64, well that's the real question, isn't it? This page from N64 Magazine issue 10, it's having a look at Diddy Kong Racing, which was a big deal back then, proper Mario Kart competitor. Right at the top we have the contenders, introducing some of the characters you could pick. There's Crunch the Croc, apparently one to avoid. Always. According to the N64 character assessment, which is a bit harsh. Then there's Diddy himself, described as a good starting point. Bumper the Badger is there too, heavier than Diddy but useful in rough terrain, and then Banjo the Bear, who's good for top speed but not so much for handling. A bit like Crunch then, maybe they should team up at the back. Moving on, we've got the vehicles. Apparently the races in Diddy Kong Racing use 3 types of vehicles. First up, the kart, which is your standard go-kart, reliable and mostly used. Then there's the hovercraft, they reckon it's the least successful, good in a straight line but a nightmare for corners. Finally the aeroplane, which sounds like a laugh to fly around in, but apparently the collision detection is a bit dodgy, you might bump into invisible walls. They also mention this skiddery thing, or 2-wheel cornering system like Mario Kart drifting, which works in karts and planes. Lastly, there's a bit about power about that, which is all about the power-ups you get from balloons. Red balloons are missiles, unguided and homing, good for taking out opponents. Blue balloons are speed-ups, and they've got speed up, super speed up, and dangerous speed up, which they actually advise against using. Bit scary then. Says the reviewer, we do not recommend them for the dangerous ones. Helpful advice that. Cheers, Zai. So yeah, that's the Diddy Kong Racing page. Looks like they're quite keen on it, apart from poor old Crunch, and maybe the hovercraft. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's having a gander at Diddy Kong Racing, which was a big deal back then, being on the N64 and all. It's got these little character bios for Conker, Tip Tup, Pipsy and Timber. You know, the racers in the game. Racy. Conker, bless him, they call him cute, but say his cuteness is stomach-turning, a bit harsh maybe. Apparently if you can't get Diddy, then Conker is your squirrel, which I suppose is a backhanded compliment. Tip Tup the turtle is there. They reckon he's a bit of a favourite and nippy, and good for the later stages of races. Our hard-topped hero, they call him. Yeah, alright. Then there's Pipsy the mouse, who apparently is the only obvious female character, which is a bit of a 90s way of putting it, isn't it? They say she's fast, and can turn almost literally on a sixpence, which is a pretty good turn radius, I suppose. They reckon she's a bit irritating, but they still like using her through gritted teeth. Cheeky. Finally, Timber the tiger. What's going on with those eyes? They ask. Yeah, he does look a bit intense, doesn't he? Apparently he's more about maneuverability than speed, and they don't use him much because of it, but still, those eyes. They're calling him the return of the space cowboy, whatever that means. Down below, they're explaining Taj the elephant, saying he's your friendly neighborhood blue Indian elephant with magic powers. Right then. Apparently, talking to him lets you switch vehicles between cart, hovercraft and aeroplane, because some areas need specific vehicles. There are races against Taj too, and if you win you get an extra golden balloon, which sounds like a nice bonus. Joshua. They've got sections on power-up balloons as well. Purple ones are shields, different levels of shielding by the looks of it. Green ones are mines and bubbles, good for tight racing lines apparently, and multi-balloons are magnets which can win you races on their own and pull racers backwards. Sounds a bit overpowered, doesn't it? Accurate. There are some screenshots of the game in action, showing taillage and some racing bits, and then there's a little tip about power sliding, using the R button and steering, saying you can even drive in a two-wheeled circle. Show off! So yeah, it's a Diddy Kong Racing page, character intros, power-ups, and a bit about Taj the elephant. Standard magazine stuff for the time really, getting us hyped for the Christmas releases. This page from N64 Magazine, it's giving us the lowdown on Diddy Kong Racing. Right at the top it says start here, and to be fair, it looks like you might actually need it with this game, doesn't it? They reckon it's complicated but not to play, which is a typical reviewer thing to say, isn't it? Sounds like young Zai's a bit overwhelmed. It seems like the whole game is structured around getting these golden balloons, and then racing in different worlds to collect Wizpig amulet pieces. There are 4 worlds initially accessible from Adventure Island: Dino Domain, Sherbet Island, Snowflake Mountain, and Dragon Forest. You do normal races, then boss races, and then silver coin challenges in each world. Sounds like a lot of faffing about to get to Wizpig, who looks like a right grumpy pig in the diagram. It even mentions a second ending if you get all the amulet pieces and beat Wizpig, and then some other hidden worlds. Blimey, they really packed it in. There's a diagram showing the world map, starting at Adventure Island in the middle, surrounded by Dino Domain, Sherbet Island, Snowflake Mountain and Dragon Forest, and then leading to Future Funland and Dragon Forest again and a second finish. It's all a bit convoluted for a racing game, isn't it? But I suppose that's Nintendo for you. Always got to add a bit of extra stuff. Key. Down at the bottom there's a section on the controls, explaining what all the buttons do: analog stick for steering, Z trigger for power-ups, A button for accelerating, B button for brakes, R button for power slides. Typical stuff really, although they do mention the hovercraft being a bit of a pain to steer. And there's all the C buttons for changing the view, map, and co-pilot warnings. It's all standard Nintendo controller stuff at the end of the day, isn't it? At Dory. Overall, it seems like Diddy Kong Racing is trying to be a bit more than just your average racer, with all these worlds and challenges and amulet pieces. Whether it's actually any good, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? But Zai here seems to be a bit lost in it all already. This page from N64 Magazine, it's all about Diddy Kong Racing, isn't it? Looking back, it's a bit of a roadmap really for those of us who were maybe stuck after beating Wizpig the first time. It's got sections like Prepare for Takeoff, which is all about getting to Diddy Kong's 5th world. Apparently just beating Wizpig once isn't enough. Typical. It goes on about collecting Wizpig amulet quarters from each world after you've done the boss for the 2nd time. Then there's Donkey section, which is a bit cheeky, talking about the battle modes in Adventure Island and finding keys to unlock them. Apparently beating them battle modes is important later. Mookie. They mentioned the trophy challenge, which, if I remember right, was like a mini Grand Prix against all the other racers, and you had to get enough points to win. Then there's something about golden trophies, and winning them to get to Diddy Kong's 5th world. It also mentions the TT amulet, which you get by beating all the battle modes. And finally, it talks about the final race with Wizpig, saying it's the fifth world and simpler than Adventure Island. It's funny looking back, they made it sound like beating Whizpig the first time was just the beginning, didn't they? All those extra bits to unlock amulets, trophies, battles, just to get to the proper ending. Very rare, always making you work for it. Good times though, wasn't it? This page from the magazine delves into the Dino Domain tracks of Diddy Kong Racing. Ah, Diddy Kong Racing, it was everywhere back then, wasn't it? This page focuses on Ancient Lake and Fossil Canyon, giving you the lowdown on how to tackle them. For Ancient Lake, they're banging on about picking up bananas just after the start and using the zipper to speed up on the first lap. Apparently, shooting the Bronto, that's the big dinosaur plodding about, will help clear your path and maybe inconvenience your mates if you're playing multiplayer. The target time trial to beat is 54:02, and completing it unlocks the cart, aeroplane and hovercraft vehicles. 1 balloon to enter, and 6 for the silver coin challenge. Sounds straightforward enough, probably spent ages trying to shave off milliseconds back then. Then it's on to Fossil Canyon. The tip here is to use the zipper at the start, and aim for the next one at the bend, jumping over the lake and cutting the corner. Leaving the tunnel, there's another zipper, and they suggest a skid turn and lifting off the accelerator for a boost. Finally, they mention the left-hand branch being quicker but trickier, especially during the silver coin challenge as it's got fewer power-ups. 2 balloons to enter this one, 7 for the silver coin challenge, and a time trial to beat of 1 hour 30 minutes and 0 seconds. Blimey, that sounds like a proper slog for the time trial. Completing this also gets you the cart, aeroplane and hovercraft. Seems a bit generous with the unlockables for just these 2 tracks, or maybe they were just trying to get us hooked early on. There's also a bit titled, A Statistician Writes, which, if I'm honest, sounds a bit pretentious for a kids game magazine. But apparently, they've had some boffin looking at the difficulty of Diddy Kong Racing, and they reckon it doesn't get harder steadily. They say some tracks are easy, and others, particularly those silver coin challenges, are a pain. N64 Magazine's science staff Charming have examined the difficulty variations and given each track a rating out of 10, which is all supposedly part of some grand plan for completing the game in Adventure 1 and Mirror Mode. They even have a graph showing the difficulty curve, which seems a bit overkill, doesn't it? But hey, it's Christmas '97, everyone was probably trying to sound a bit more clever than they actually were. Still, good tips for Diddy Kong Racing if you were stuck, or just wanted to show off to your mates that you read the gaming mags for all the pro tips, not just the pictures. This page showcases some tips and tricks for Diddy Kong Racing. Ah, Diddy Kong Racing, what a classic racer that was on the N64 back in '97. It seems like only yesterday we were unwrapping consoles for Christmas and getting stuck into this. Anyway, the page starts with Hot Top Volcano, giving you the heads up to take the narrower path early on for bananas, and to watch out for arches. Typical stuff really, but helpful for youngsters back then. It mentions the aeroplane and hovercraft as unlockable vehicles and balloons for silver coin challenges and time trials, so completionists had their work cut out. Then there's Jungle Falls, where they suggest sticking to the left wall and using the zipper to jump the lake. Again, fairly straightforward advice, but it's all about shaving off those seconds in it. Cart, aeroplane and hovercraft are the vehicles for this one, with the same balloon challenges as Hot Top Volcano. Trophy Race gets a mention, noting cart and aeroplane as vehicle choices. It points out that winning gold in Dino Domain's Trophy Race should be a doddle, and set you up nicely for Hot Top Volcano, the hardest race apparently. Bit of an overstatement maybe, but it was challenging enough for the time. Checky. Fire Mountain Battle is up next, described as an egg-collecting mission on Ancient Lake. Aeroplane is the vehicle, and the aim is to collect eggs and bring them back to your nest. Sounds a bit like Capture the Flag, but with eggs and planes. They reckon it's a bit dull focusing on egg collecting though, which is probably fair enough. The missile combat was the fun bit. Finally, there's the boss section, specifically Triceratops Race. Speed start is key, and you can apparently stay ahead after the first speed-up balloon. They mention a shortcut behind some bushes, but suggest not bothering if you can't handle it. Bit passive-aggressive there. Magazine Reviewer. On the side there's a difficulty table for various Diddy Kong Racing levels, rating them from 1 to 10. Ancient Lake and Jungle Falls are a 2 or 3, while Hot Top Volcano is a 3 or 5. Green Village and Windmill Plains are up at 7 and 8 respectively, and Space Alpha is a whopping 6 or 10. Bit of a range there, someone couldn't make their mind up it seems. Warrington. All in all, a handy little page of tips for Diddy Kong Racing, reminding me of simpler times when getting a magazine like this was the best way to get the inside scoop on games. This page from N64 Magazine takes me right back to Christmas '97, doesn't it? It's all about Diddy Kong Racing, remember that one? Proper good kart racer on the N64, especially if you had mates round for a laugh. This spread is focused on Snowflake Mountain, one of the tracks in Adventure Island, breaking it down into Everfrost Peak and Walrus Cove. Everfrost Peak is for planes, and they've got these numbered steps with little screenshots showing you tips for the course, like collecting bananas and hitting zippers obviously. They're even saying to decide early if you're going under or over the arch cryptic stuff for a kid's game, eh? Apparently the tunnel zipper is best used with the accelerator on, but not flat out, which sounds a bit hairy. Volgurgus. Then there's Walrus Cove, for carts. Again, similar setup with numbered tips and pictures. Pick up bananas in the tunnel, skid turn around corners. Standard karting fare really. They reckon there's a shortcut with a zipper halfway along that can win you the race, but it's tricky to stay on the track. Cheeky. It's all laid out quite nicely, colourful as you'd expect from a Nintendo mag back then. They're going on about zippers giving you massive speed boosts, mentioning if you hit them with the accelerator off you get a longer boost. And big zips are green, purple ones are shorter. All crucial info for a serious racer like me back in the day. And they've even got the times to beat for the time trial challenges. 1 hour 31 minutes and 21 seconds for Everfrost Peak, and 2 hours 31 minutes and 23 seconds for Walrus Cove, if you were wondering and felt like dusting off the old N64. Good times. This page from a Christmas issue of an N64 mag, probably when we all got our consoles for Crimbo, harks back to Diddy Kong Racing, a proper kart racer on the N64. It kicks off with tips for Snowball Valley. Seems simple enough. Follow the right branch for bananas on lap 1, and then just go straight for speed on later laps. Apparently missing zippers and using power-ups to get up hills is key. Sounds standard karting fare really. Gone. Then there's Frosty Village. Looks like they're talking about picking the right arch under a bridge for a power-up, the right one being faster but trickier. They mention zippers again, in a Misty section. Seems like they're pointing out obvious bits and pieces to help you win, but back then, we probably needed all the help we could get, eh? Next up is Trophy Race, which is a general tip section. Snowflake Mountain is supposed to be tough at the start, needing banana collection to keep up. Frosty Village and Walrus Cove are described as easy enough, but Snowball Valley is a bit rough. The advice is to go right at the start for bananas, maintain speed and you'll be alright. Solid, if not exactly groundbreaking, wisdom. Warrington Norwich. Icicle Pyramid Battle sounds like a battle mode on Snowball Valley. Start with 8 bananas, missile opponents to make them lose bananas. Bit of a Mario Kart battle mode rip-off it seems, but good fun with mates no doubt. Finally, Walrus Race, the boss race. Easiest boss race apparently. Downhill, and staying ahead is the aim. Red balloons slow you down, speed-ups help. Again, pretty standard boss race stuff. Warrington no doubt. Oh, and there's a little bit about Mines A Taj 1, which sounds like Taj the elephant, who pops up early in the game to give you challenges in kart, plane and hovercraft. It's how they introduce you to the different vehicles apparently. So yeah, Diddy Kong Racing tips, pretty straightforward stuff, but likely helpful when the game was new, and we were all figuring it out. Good times. Good times. This page from a retro N64 magazine takes a look at Diddy Kong Racing, focusing on a place called Sherbet Island, off the coast of Adventure Island apparently. It seems they were quite impressed with the water effects at the time, even comparing them to Wave Race, which was a big deal back then. They reckon Rare put a lot of effort into the graphics for this one, which is probably fair enough. The page then gives a guide to a couple of tracks within Sherbet Island, Whale Bay and Pirate Lagoon. For Whale Bay, it's all about using the hovercraft, and they're giving tips on using the zippers and bouncing off the whale to get around quickly. For Pirate Lagoon, again hovercraft is the vehicle of choice, and they're talking about shortcuts and using zippers for jumps. All pretty standard racing stuff really, but crucial if you wanted to beat those time trials. And of course, being a 90s gaming mag, there's a big list of cheat codes. Things like OFFROAD for four-wheel drive carts, BOGUS, BANANAS for banana power-down vehicles, and loads more like changing balloon colors, disabling weapons and messing with the AI. Standard cheat code fare for the time, most of which you probably found out by just mashing buttons at the options screen anyway. Simpler times. This page depicts a feature on Diddy Kong Racing, a game that was quite the looker back in '97 on the N64, wasn't it? It's from the N64 Arena section of the magazine, going by the top there, Warrington. The page is broken down into sections detailing a few of the racetracks and a boss battle. First up is Crescent Island, which suggests taking the left branch for extra speed on the first and third laps, and the right branch on lap 2 for bananas. Practical advice I suppose for getting ahead of the pack. Then there's Treasure Caves, recommending a right dive at the start for a zipper boost and bananas. Seems straightforward enough. Trophy Race talks about using the hovercraft as it's apparently easier, and Darkwater Beach Battle is a battle mode on Crescent Island, where you have to chuck missiles at each other sounds a bit chaotic. Finally, Octopus Race, which is a boss battle against a giant octopus. The tip here is to get ahead and use homing missiles to finish him off. Crafty stuff. There's also a N64 Secret Service bit in a box on the right, like they always had, revealing secrets. This one talks about Drumstick the Turkey, DKR's first hidden character, with a riddle about a prince and an evil witch. Typical cryptic nonsense, but we lapped it up back then, didn't we? It also mentions another secret character, TT, who is supposed to be super fast, and you have to beat all the time trials to unlock him. Sounds like a proper challenge, although back then we had the time to grind away at these things. And yeah, it mentions the magazine details at the bottom there, Christmas 1997, issue 10. Blimey, time flies. Good memories of thumbing through these pages back in the day, eh? This page from the N64 magazine, probably around Christmas time back in '97, is all about Diddy Kong Racing, which was the big racing game at the time, wasn't it? It's focusing on the Dragon Forest world, giving us the lowdown on a couple of tracks, Boulder Canyon and Greenwood Village. Right at the top, it mentions Dragon Forest is supposed to be a tough area to get into, you need 16 balloons, and it goes on about the graphics being impressive for the time, saying it's all dragons and spooky woods. A bit much perhaps, but yeah, it looked alright for the N64. They reckon the silver coin challenges in Dragon Forest are proper hard, and hint at some secret message in mirror writing, which is a bit of a laugh really. There's a bit about Bananagy, which is basically just bananas scattered everywhere, like coins in Mario Kart they reckon. Pick 'em up to go faster, drop 'em if you get hit. Standard karting fare really. Then a shortcuts section that mentions you can pick track select from the menu, once you've unlocked tracks in adventure mode. Groundbreaking stuff. The menu. For Boulder Canyon they're recommending the hovercraft. To get in you'll need 20 balloons, and to unlock the silver coin challenge you'll need 37, with a time trial target of 2 minutes, 18 seconds, and 80 milliseconds. Step 1 is using the speed-ups right from the start to power up the hill. Step 2 is about jumping over the drawbridge to ring a bell, apparently that's tricky if someone's behind you. Step 3 is taking a left branch and bouncing around the final corner. Hey, Greenwood Village, they recommend the cart. 17 balloons to get in this one, 24 for the silver coin challenge, and a time trial of 2 minutes 6 seconds and 66 milliseconds. Step 1 is about using the first zipper to get to another one, and maybe a shortcut with bananas, but braking hard is needed, so maybe not worth it. Step 2 is about a slow banana section. You're meant to save a speed up for it and stick to the wall for the next zipper. Finally, step 3 is about a twisty bit where you need good skidding skills and a good eye to get both zippers. Come of war. So yeah, just your typical track guides to get you through Diddy Kong Racing. Gotta get those balloons and beat those time trials, didn't you? This page looks like it's from a Christmas edition of a N64 mag, probably back in '97. It's got a bit of a guide to Diddy Kong Racing levels, classic. There's info on Windmill Plains and Haunted Woods giving you little tips. For Windmill Plains, it's telling you to grab 5 bananas and a speed up at the start, and maybe dump an oil slick at the zipper, which is a bit cheeky. Haunted Woods is all about going different ways around the loop each lap to get more bananas and keeping the accelerator down when you hit the zipper after the tunnel. Good advice actually. They even mention getting another zipper after that, maybe into Banshee Boardwalk. Banshee Boardwalk, now that's a tune. Biddy. Then there's a section on Trophy Race, Smoky Castle Battle and Dragon Race. Looks like it's covering different race types. Trophy Race is just your standard race. Vehicle choices are kart, aeroplane or hovercraft. Smoky Castle Battle is about collecting treasure chests and bananas. Sounds like chaos. Dragon Race is a boss race against a dragon, telling you to avoid the dragon's breath, and use power starts and blue balloons. Remember blue balloons? They were the business. Here. There's a fast start, tip 2, explaining the purple and blue boosts you could get at the start line in DKR. Tricky to time those, weren't they? And a little box about Diddy Kong and balloons. Apparently the max is 47, a prime number no less. Bit random, but alright. Finally at the bottom it lists some challenges and track numbers. 20 tracks for straight races, 20 for silver coin challenges, 4 looses in Adventure Island, and 3 Taj challenges, totaling 47 challenges. Looks like they're just adding up the content there. Yeah, pretty standard tips page for Diddy Kong Racing. Brings back memories of Christmas mornings and arguing with your mates about who got blue balloons first. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 10, it's all about future funland from Diddy Kong Racing. Looking back, Diddy Kong Racing, what a game that was, eh? It seemed like Rare just threw everything and the kitchen sink into it. This article focuses on one of the world's future funland, Genotoi. They're talking about the tracks, Space Dust Alley, Dark Moon Caverns, Star City, and Spaceport Alpha. Each gets a little write-up and a screenshot, showing the time to beat in time trial and what vehicles you can use. Looks like you need to collect balloons to get in. Those were always a bit of a faff, weren't they? Silver coins too, blimey, they really did pack it all in. Gatite. They reckon Space Dust Alley is easy. Dark Moon Caverns has loop-the-loops. Star City is all about sharp turns and bananas. And Spaceport Alpha is apparently a nightmare, especially for the silver coin challenge. Sounds about right. Spaceport Alpha was always a bit of a pain. Warrington Norsa. There's a section on TT mode, showing the stopwatch character, TT. Remember him? Bit of a weirdo. Apparently he helps you with time trials, monitoring your performance and racing against ghosts. Quite clever, I suppose, for the time. The reviewer, ZY, reckons the graphics are outstanding, and I suppose they were for the N64. They mention the collision detection on the planes is dodgy, which yeah, it was a bit wonky at times, wasn't it? And they're comparing it to Mario Kart 64, saying DKR is more detailed and expansive. Bit of a dig at Mario Kart there, saying Timber is on drugs. Cheeky. Towards the bottom, they talk about the Whizpig race, the final one in Future Funland. Plane race against Whizpig. No zippers this time. Apparently you need to spam Whizpig with missiles and use shields. Good tip that. Moi. And right at the end, they mention letters about Mario Kart, how they got stick for marking it too highly, too easy, not enough tracks, and multiplayer being a lottery. Ha! Sounds like the readers were a tough crowd back then. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, probably from Christmas '97 going by the mention of issue 10, is all about Diddy Kong Racing. It's a review, looks like a pretty positive one at that, giving it a whopping 90%. Seems like they're really pushing it as a great game for the N64. Beta. The article starts off by saying it's trying to fix what was wrong with Mario Kart, which is a bit cheeky. They reckon Diddy Kong Racing nails the single-player experience, saying it's got a lifespan that's way beyond other races. They mention Adventure 2 being a mirror mode with coins in daft places. Sounds like a proper challenge back then. And then time trials, with 40 tracks, normal and mirrored, blimey, that's a lot of racing. They even mention banana tactics for beating ghosts, which is funny, reminds me of trying to get every advantage you could. There's a section on multiplayer modes, saying it's a monstrous one-player game, but they didn't have loads of time to properly test the multiplayer. They hint that the multiplayer isn't quite as good as the single player, maybe lacking the tension of Mario Kart, and the power-ups are a bit predictable. They talk about different multiplayer modes like 2-player race, 2-player trophy race, and 3 or 4-player versions of the same. Standard stuff really for back then, split-screen madness with your mates. Warrington, sir. They've got little boxes highlighting different aspects of the game. Visuals gets a 9, saying Rare has the keys to Nintendo's box of tricks, and the rivals are anything seen to date. Sounds also gets a 9, praising the music that remixes itself. Mastery gets an 8, saying it's technically brilliant but borrows elements from other games. And Lifespan gets a 9 again, calling it unsurpassed as a racing game. Strong scores all round really. There's a bit about how long it took the reviewer's eye to finish it, saying it took a week to get through the 5th world and beat Whizpig, and another 7 days for Platinum Balloon mode. Blimey, that sounds like dedication. They reckon it's got a massive lifespan and is the best value game on the N64. The verdict bit at the bottom says Diddy Kong Racing fixes Mario Kart's faults but makes its own, but they still love Mario and Luigi a tiny bit more. Fair enough, Mario Kart is Mario Kart, isn't it? Overall, sounds like they're well impressed with Diddy Kong Racing, calling it brilliant and a classic in the making. It's a good advert for the game, makes you want to pick it up for Christmas if you haven't already. There were a few screenshots, showing the colourful graphics and characters racing. Diddy Kong of course, and Banjo, Conker, Tip Top, Pipsy, Crunch, Bumper and Timber, all get a mention as playable characters. Looks like a right laugh. This page showcases a review of Madden 64 on the Nintendo 64, calling it the Super Bowl on the Nintendo 64. It's from an N64 Magazine, issue 10. Right at the top, there's a little box that tells you the game is from Electronic Arts, it's coming out in December, it's gonna set you back £55, a fair whack back then, and it takes up 64 megabytes, which was pretty beefy for the N64 at the time. It's a 14-player game, and uses the controller and rumble packs. The main headline makes it sound pretty exciting, and the article talks about Madden being a big name in American football games, saying it's always been well regarded, especially since its days on the Sega Mega Drive. They reckon this N64 version is pretty good, thankfully avoiding mistakes from previous conversions. The review mentions the easy Taos play selection, lots of tactical options, and John Madden himself being in it as a commentator. Graphically, they say the N64 really helps, making the players and stadiums 3D and more detailed than before. They are impressed with the camera angles and the TV-style presentation, especially when you launch a long pass. PE. There's a bit where they talk about the gameplay, saying it's strategic and athletic and lets you choose plays from menus, which is standard Madden really. They say it's basically the Madden we all know but with added bells and whistles for the 64-bit generation. The reviewer, ZY, in one of those little speech bubble bits, mentions that Madden games always arrive with some style on Nintendo consoles, and he's dead right there. There's also a section called Madden's Keys to Victory, which gives you some tips for playing as Miami and Indianapolis. For Miami, it suggests using R-Web to anchor the line and attack the defensive front, and to force things into the middle. For Indianapolis, they suggest running behind Team Anderich. Sounds like proper footy strategy stuff for those in the know. Another quote box from ZY says the ever-trustworthy John Madden gives his usual good advice during the game. Can't argue with that, he was always part of the Madden experience. And there's a funny caption under another screenshot which says, as a player ran with the ball, the last thing he expected was a low-flying New York Jet. Looks like someone got a bit clattered. Overall, it seems like they're pretty impressed with Madden 64 and reckon it's worth checking out if you're into your American football. This page from N64 Magazine, it's got that classic late 90s look about it, doesn't it? It's all about NFL Quarterback Club 98 for the N64, and it seems like they're pitching it as a rival to Madden 64. Up in the corner, there's one of those N64 Star Game things, so they must think it's pretty good. It says Acclaim published it, December release, 64 meg, Rumble Pack compatible and a hefty £50 price tag, which was a lot back then. Sponsored by Interact, who were always knocking about with their accessories, weren't they? The headline is trying to get you excited. Discover whether the old favorite can be beaten by a new contender, making it clear what the article is about. It's got a big NFL 98 Quarterback Club title, very bold and blue. Down below there are a few screenshots of the game. Looks quite snazzy for the N64. Definitely sharper than what we were used to. One of them is showing the passing stats screen, with a picture of Troy Aikman, so they're using real players, always a good selling point. Another screenshot shows some in-game action, American football pitch and players looking alright, blocky polygons, but that's just how it was back then. Another little screenshot showing the team lining up. They've even put a little caption saying, the Steelers line up for a crucial home game. There's a bit of text where the reviewer, ZY, pronounced Zai apparently, is saying that after Madden's success, everyone tried to copy it, but not many got close. He says, NFL Quarterback Club series is better than before, with all the proper NFL stuff like team logos and player names. Apparently it's got 30 NFL teams, real players, and even little photos of them. Sounds thorough, doesn't it? Worry. He mentions it's fully 3D, with detailed players and loads of camera angles, 27 in fact. He says it's got better graphics than Madden, being the first N64 game in hires, 640 by 480, which makes it look less blocky, and the animation is smoother. Quite the claim, a follower. He goes on to say it's good to watch and got the best graphics for any American football game, ever. Sorry, he adds, bit of a cheeky aside there. Gameplay-wise, he thinks it's a mix of arcade thrills and strategy, like Madden, and plenty of variables to keep you busy until the Buffalo Bills come home. A bit of an odd reference. Maybe a football joke? He also mentions you can do player drafts and create your own players, which was becoming standard in sports games around then. He finishes off saying if you see it in a shop window, don't just rush in and buy it, have a cup of tea and read this review first. Bit of self-promotion there at the end, telling you to make a wiser choice. Overall, sounds like they're impressed with it, but keeping a bit of British reserve about it all, as you do. This page takes a look at Madden 64 on the N64, specifically focusing on the viewing options available. Apparently there are 8 in total. The article highlights 4 of them: Madden Cam, Sideline Cam, Diagonal Cam, and Helmet Cam. Madden Cam, they say, is for the old-school Madden fans, reminiscent of the Mega Drive days, giving a wide view of the play. Sideline Cam is described as more strategic, good for watching the line of scrimmage, and working out passing options. Diagonal Cam is for tele-football watchers, a more cinematic angle, good for seeing the action unfold and apparently handy for kickoffs and punts. Helmet Cam is pitched as the most exciting, putting you right in the thick of it, seeing the thrills and spills from a player's perspective, and they reckon it's great with the Rumble Pack. Looking at the screenshots, they do give a decent sense of each viewpoint. The article also touches on the graphics, noting they are good for 3D player sprites, but the animation isn't anything to write home about. They mention the snow effects are a visual treat, which is fair enough. Snow in games back then was always a bit of a novelty. The reviewer, ZY, also moans a bit about the lack of official NFL license, meaning teams are just city-based, like San Francisco or Miami, rather than having proper team names and logos. Apparently, NFL Quarterback Club had the official license, and they say that game looks better, with sharper colors and smoother animations, and reckon it's a step up visually from Madden. It sounds like ZY is maybe a bit more impressed with NFL Quarterback Club's visuals overall, even if he admits Madden 64 is the best Madden game so far on any system. This page from N64 Magazine is having a look at NFL Quarterback Club 98 on the N64, and it's all about the different camera angles you can use in the game. They reckon there are a staggering 27 views in total, which sounds like a lot, doesn't it? The title of the piece is, Which Way to Look? Posing the question if they are all worthwhile. There are 4 main camera views highlighted here, each with a little screenshot to show you what they're like. First up is QBC Cam, which they say is similar to Madden's classic view. It's described as a good, effective perspective and perfect for seeing the whole play. They do mention that because of the sprite size it's a bit harder to see your receivers, but you can see the potential lineman, which is good for real-life quarterback feels apparently. Then there's Blimp Cam, which is an overall view from up high. They reckon it's good for seeing how well your plays are developing and working out the opposition's strengths and weaknesses. Sounds a bit detached from the action though, more like you are strategizing rather than playing. Next is Sideline Cam Away, which is a Sedian view, similar to Madden again apparently. They say it's an unusual angle, and might be included more for comprehensive reasons, rather than being that useful for gameplay, but might be good to watch a runner going down the sideline. Finally there is Create a Cam, which sounds like it could be a bit of a gimmick. Apparently, in theory, you can create your ideal viewing angle and tinker with zoom, tilt, and all sorts. They reckon in practice it's probably too many options and you'll likely get overwhelmed. Sounds like something you'd mess with once and then forget about. The article also mentions that Madden was the first game to get play selection right, and it's easy to use with clear diagrams and loads of plays. They reckon Madden's gameplay is intuitive, but NFL Quarterback Club is more fussy and frustrating. Apparently mastering passing is harder, and the controls are a bit baffling even if you use the John Madden football control mode. Sounds like it might be a bit fiddly compared to Madden then. They even say the play selection screen is more scrolling and skipping about, and harder to remember your favorite plays on NFL QBC. There's a little stato box which is a bit of a laugh. It's got some random American football facts like Troy Aikman's stats, and a silly fact about Philadelphia never losing at home on the 13th of any month starting with J in a leap year. Bit of nonsense but typical magazine filler. Finally there's a bit about endorsements, mentioning John Madden's usual endorsement meaning lots of pictures of him and sound samples. And NFL Quarterback Club has the NFL license and Brett Favre endorsing it, who apparently helped with play designs. So overall it seems like NFL Quarterback Club 98 is trying to compete with Madden but maybe not quite hitting the mark in terms of playability, even if it does have loads of camera angles to choose from, most of which you'll probably never use. This page showcases a retro review, like something you'd have flicked through back in the day, of 2 American football games for the Nintendo 64, Madden 64 and NFL Quarterback Club. It's got that classic magazine layout with tables, screenshots, and big bold headings. Looking at the facts and figures table, it's comparing the 2 games side by side. Quarterback Club seems to tick more boxes on paper with NFL team logos and players, more offensive and defensive plays, and even weather effects like fair, snow, rain and wind, which was pretty snazzy at the time. Madden 64 bizarrely has N/A for number of stadiums, which is a bit of a blank. Both were priced around the same, £5,055, and slated for a December release, perfect for Christmas. The main verdict text reckons that while Quarterback Club looks the part with its NFL license and fancy graphics, the reviewer even says, see it and drool, about the visuals. Madden 64 wins out on gameplay. They say Madden just feels more satisfying to play, and the controls are more intuitive. Quarterback Club is described as a beautiful looker, but needing tweaking on the gameplay. There are little boxes highlighting key points for each game. Madden 64 gets praised for visuals being the best Madden so far, sounds with great commentary and mastery for intuitive controls. Quarterback Club is lauded for simply stunning graphics, but the sounds are described as moronic commentary. Ouch. Mastery for Quarterback Club is marked down, saying it lacks a truly intuitive play system. Both games are given decent scores in the end. Madden 64 gets a whopping 92%, and Quarterback Club gets 86%. So Madden just edges it, according to Tim Tucker, the reviewer. The screenshots show the games in action, blocky polygons and all, very much of their time. You can see a bit of play happening, tackles and helmets and whatnot. It all brings back memories of rainy afternoons trying to figure out the controls on those chunky N64 pads. Good times, even if the commentary was a bit moronic now and then. This page features a look at the game Automobili Lamborghini for the N64. It's got a really bold title splashed across the middle, and it seems they're pretty impressed with the name itself. There are a bunch of screenshots, showing off what the game looks like. You've got your Lamborghini racing around tracks, showing the lap times and positions. Pretty standard racing game stuff really. Mossa. The reviewer, Zane, has got a few things to say, mostly in little speech bubbles next to the screenshots. He's saying the first track is easy, probably a bit too easy for anyone who fancies themselves a decent driver. Then he mentions it's too easy to end up in an awkward track position, which sounds a bit frustrating. He's also not too impressed with the car landings after jumps, calling them unconvincing, which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement. But he does give a nod to the tunnels for giving a good sense of speed, even if he then adds, pity about the rest. Bit harsh, Zai. Down in the corner, there's an info box that tells you it's out now, and 64 megabytes, supports 1 to 4 players, and uses the controller pack and rumble pack, all the usual N64 bits. It's priced at £55, which was probably quite a bit back then, and it looks like Interact sponsored this section. Maybe they were flogging their rumble packs. Overall, it seems like a bit of a mixed bag, this Lamborghini game. Not a complete disaster, but not setting the world alight either. This page depicts a guide to the 6 tracks in Automobili Lamborghini for the N64. Right then, 6 tracks, eh? For a racing game back then, that was actually pretty decent, wasn't it? They've split them into 3 types: country, city and beach, with 2 tracks each. For the country tracks, tracks 1 and 4, they reckon it's the fastest because it's oval-shaped with straights. Apparently mistakes should be minimal, which is always easier said than done when you're actually playing it after a few crisps and a can of fizzy pop. Track 4 is meant to be a bend-heavy version with a couple of shortcuts, but they say they aren't much help. City tracks, tracks 2 and 5, are described as a quick nip through a drab grey city. Sounds thrilling, doesn't it? Track 5, they say, is the best course actually. Apparently, there's a shortcut early on, and some blissfully tricky angled bends. They even mention a fountain that might seem irritating but is easily dealt with, just mount the rim. Classic gaming tip there. And a tunnel, of course. Every good city track needs a tunnel. Beach tracks, tracks 3 and 6, are called easy-ish, with no shortcuts, and just a couple of bends. The challenge is apparently overtaking other cars, because the track is narrow. Track 6 is described as tedious if you get it wrong and end up in a coma. Bit dramatic, aren't we, with only a couple of so-so bends. There's also a bit about arcade and championship modes. Arcade mode splits the tracks into 2 lots of 3, with 2 difficulty settings. Championship mode lets you adjust laps and pit stops, and basically you race all 6 tracks to get points. They say it's easy until you go for the skiddy expert setting. Ah yes, expert settings in racing games back then usually meant just making the AI ruthlessly fast and you sliding all over the shop like Bambi on ice. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, bless it, is having a bit of a moan about Automobili Lamborghini, or Lamborghini on the N64. It starts off with a section called Room for Review, which is properly taking the mickey out of a pointless camera option, where you can pause the game and just swing the camera around the car. The reviewer, Zai, is baffled by it, asking, what is the point? I remember that feeling. Sometimes these games had features that just left you scratching your head. Then there's a bit about the cameras in general in the game, and Zai is complaining about having to use the D-pad to change the view when you're already using the Z trigger and analog stick. He even jokes that it makes Duke Nukem 64's controls look good. And we all know Duke Nukem's controls on the N64 were a bit of a mess. The main review section starts off with say, another 4-wheeled disappointment then. Ouch. It seems Lamborghini wasn't living up to the hype from E3. It's compared unfavorably to Top Gear Rally, which is fair enough. Top Gear Rally was pretty decent. Zai says Lamborghini looks like a disaster, and the music is described as a grotesque, bit pear-shaped almost immediately. He even mentions go 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 dance music like 2 Unlimited, cobbled together on a Casio Classic keyboard, which is a proper burn. Whoa! There's talk about game options being fairly lackluster, with not much track or car tweaking available. The multiplayer apparently makes the computer struggle a bit too, which was often the case back then. The tracks are called bland as Top Gear rallies, but without any of the excitement, and Zai reckons the courses are too obvious and never really threaten to give you a proper sense of speed, except on the few straights. He says the game never feels very fast, even at 120 miles per hour, and might as well be 20 miles per hour for all the excitement it generates. Ouch again. There's a bit at the bottom called the pits, which talks about the customized car feature in Lamborghini, and it's described as absolutely unfathomably rubbish. Apparently you pull into the pits, and your mechanics stand around with an engine box. To get your pit crew moving, you have to waggle the analog stick apparently in a circle, not side to side mind you, and it's a right faff. Zai reckons a good pit stop takes about 30 seconds. There are screenshots showing the pit stop in action, with meter bars you have to fill by waggling the stick like mad. It sounds like a proper chore. Overall, it seems like Lamborghini was a bit of a letdown for Zai, and reading this now, I can remember the feeling when some of these racing games just didn't quite hit the mark. Top Gear Rally was definitely a benchmark at the time, and it sounds like Lamborghini just couldn't keep up. It's all a bit of a brutal takedown, but that was magazines back then, wasn't it? No messing about. This page is a review of the game Lamborghini on the N64 from back in Christmas of '97. Memories of excitedly flicking through these mags hoping for some present ideas. The review is headlined, Floor Player, which is a bit of a giveaway really, isn't it? It seems the reviewer, Tim Weaver, wasn't overly impressed with the multiplayer in particular, calling it strangely uninvolving and unbelievably slow. Harsh. Looking at the screenshots, you can see the split-screen mode they're moaning about. It's a bit basic looking, even for the time, isn't it? They're complaining about the backgrounds being faded out to keep the speed up, and that the courses are a bit predictable. To be fair, split screen on the N64 could be a bit of a blurry mess sometimes, couldn't it? Yay. The review also mentions problems with the handling in single player on the expert difficulty, saying it's hard for the wrong reasons, with the cars drifting all over the place. They even suggest the skid-friendly tires are to blame. It does sound a bit frustrating, especially when you just want to get back on the track. They give it scores in little boxes for visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, all around the 6 or 7 mark. The verdict at the end is pretty damning actually, saying it's nowhere near as comprehensive as TGR, that's Top Gear Rally of course, and that Lamborghini is just a competent but unsatisfying addition to the N64 racing scene. Ouch! Evil Luris. Overall it got a 67% score, which isn't brilliant, is it? Seems like Lamborghini on the N64 was a bit of a letdown, especially compared to other racers around at the time like Rage Racer and Top Gear Rally. Shame really, always hoping for a decent racer on the N64 back then. Still, gotta love these old mag reviews, takes you right back. This page depicts a review of FIFA 98 for the N64 from what looks like issue 10 of N64 Magazine, back in Christmas of '97. FIFA 98, Road to World Cup. That was a big deal back then, wasn't it? The reviewer, someone called ZY, pronounced Zai apparently, seems pretty chuffed with it, saying it's a bit special. Remember the hype for this one. They reckon everything about FIFA 98 is better than before, right down to the name cheeky dig at FIFA 64 there, which, yeah, was a bit clunky to be fair. They're having a laugh about the development team maybe joking about getting in proper footy legends like Peter Bonetti or Nobby Stiles, and Bobby Charlton, bless them. It's saying FIFA 98 leaves ISS 64, or International Superstar Soccer 64 as it was properly called, in the dust, which was fighting talk at the time as ISS 64 was considered pretty top-notch gameplay-wise by many, myself included. They're banging on about all the improvements, saying it's got 20-fold improvements, sounds like marketing speak to me. But, looking back, it was a step up, wasn't it? They go on about how good the Canadian developers were, helping out EA and all that, and how important the official licenses were for making a football game good. It was a big deal having proper team names and kits back then, stopped you having to pretend Middlesbrough were Middlesbrough Red, or something daft. The review mentions how every goal has these elaborate celebrations, which apparently strains Piercy a bit, whoever Piercy is, probably the editor. One of the screenshots highlights a goal celebration after a good finish by Hartson for Aston Villa in a London derby, so looks like you could play club matches as well as internationals. There's another bit about Wright showing his eye for goal in the first minute of a match, typical righty. They're going on about the passing game being much improved, saying you could do precision passes and through balls, things that were a bit hit and miss in older FIFA games. Apparently, play is beautifully fluid in FIFA 98, a neat passing game like ISS 64, but with different attacking options mapped to each button on the controller. They even describe doing a lob into the box with the top C button and then volleying it home with the B button from the corner of the box. Sounds a bit complicated, but maybe that's the point. In the top right, there's a little box with FIFA 98 on it, saying it's from EA 64 meg and needs a controller pack and rumble pack. Rumble pack! That was fancy. Coming out in December, priced at £60, and sponsored by Interact, who were all over the N64 scene with their accessories. 60 quid! Games were pricey back then, weren't they? Overall it's a pretty positive review, making FIFA 98 sound like the must-have footy game for Christmas '97 on the N64, and in fairness it was a decent game for its time. Probably not 20-fold better than FIFA 64, mind you, but definitely better. This page from N64 Magazine, yeah, I remember this issue, Christmas '97, good times. It's all about FIFA 98 and how it's a massive step up from the, let's be honest, slightly ropey FIFA 64 on the N64. So the magazine is highlighting 5 great things about FIFA 98. First up, its tactics. Apparently you can finally do more than just hoof the ball upfield and hope for the best. They mention new options like kick takers and attacking bias, and even a sweeper system, which sounds a bit too much like hard work for a casual kickabout down the pub, but fair enough, it's there if you're into the nitty-gritty. Next is customizing. Right, so now you can buy and sell players, bit like Championship Manager Lite, I suppose. And you can mess about with player appearances, hair, kit, all that jazz. Sounds like you could waste hours just fiddling with that rather than actually playing the game. Right. Then there's the directional arrow. Blimey, even dead balls get a revamp. You can actually curve free kicks and corners now using the analog stick. They make a big deal about aftertouch too. Must have been a fancy feature back then. The license is a big one apparently. Every team from every World Cup qualifier is in there, so now you can be Togo or bloody Antigua. Not exactly glamorous footballing nations, are they? But I suppose it adds to the realism. They mention England, Scotland, Germany, Italy, Brazil, and even Malaysia are in there too. Quite the global affair. The last of the great things is the close quarters lob. Apparently nicked from a PlayStation game called Power Soccer. Cheeky. Basically it's a little chip over the defender. Sounds like it could be a bit cheap if you use it too much. EA. There are smaller bits too. Visuals are called crisp, clean-cut PlayStation-esque, which is probably a good thing. FIFA 64 was a bit blurry, wasn't it? Sounds get a mention, stadium effects and Blur's song too. Everyone was using that song back then, wasn't they? Mastery is about the frame rate being a bit dodgy but promising for FIFA 99. And lifespan, loads of stuff to do. World Cup, leagues, custom cups, all the usual. Verdict is a solid 83%. A real surprise, they say. Massively comprehensive. Technically very nearly there. Tim Weaver is the reviewer, and he reckons it's a roaringly good football game. Bit strong, Tim, but yeah, it was alright. FIFA 98. Definitely better than FIFA 64. We were all still waiting for the perfect football game on the N64 though, weren't we? ISS was still king in many ways. This page is from N64 Magazine, looks like issue 10. Right then, blimey. Duke Nukem 64, eh? Remember all the fuss about that one. It says here, GoldenEye's out. We don't need Duke Nukem. Haha, cheeky. They admit they were a bit dismissive at first, but plugging it into the N64 changed their minds. Apparently, the more they played it, the more they liked it. Jan. They're banging on about how GoldenEye only had 18 levels, but Duke Nukem's got 28 plus secrets. And more multiplayer options too, which was a big deal back then for bragging rights down the pub. They're calling it a serious contender for GoldenEye's crown. Bit strong that, but maybe they were genuinely impressed. It's all about deathmatch 64 inches here, it seems. They reckon it's what you get if you mix Doom and Turok deathmatches. Sounds messy. In a good way though. They've picked out 6 favorite levels, and are talking about 2 of them in detail. Hollywood Holocaust is one. They like that it's like being in a cinema, and has a toilet block. And Spaceport, which has force fields and a water fountain apparently. They're saying these levels are compact, so you're never far from a scrap. Good stuff for multiplayer. Winter Nook. Looking at the screenshots, they're pointing out the missile launcher for taking out distant targets, and toilet humor with pipe bombs, always a classic, and two-handed submachine guns, which they say are a big improvement over the PC version. Right you are. Take. Overall it seems like they went in thinking Duke Nukem 64 was just another shooter, but came out thinking it might actually be something special, maybe even rivaling GoldenEye, though probably not quite. Still, high praise back then. ZY, the reviewer, seems to be warming to it, saying it's a brilliant game, and about as close as you're going to get for a very long time to come, to GoldenEye. Strong words, strong words. Wonder if it lived up to the hype in the end. Probably not GoldenEye levels, but sounds like it was a decent blast. This page depicts a review of Duke Nukem 64, from an old N64 magazine, probably around Christmas 1997, going by the bottom there. It's got a big splash headline saying, Nintendo's Sensors a Taste have wiped through Duke Nukem like a giant Kleenex. It's still a great game though, which is a bit of a mouthful in it. Looks like they're saying even with Nintendo being all careful, it's still a decent blast. They've given it a score of 64%, not exactly glowing praise, is it? But then again, these mags were always a bit stingy with top marks. There are a couple of screenshots showing some in-game action, one with what they're calling the plasma cannon, and another with a close-up of some monster. To be fair, even back then the graphics weren't exactly cutting edge, were they? But Duke Nukem was always more about the, shall we say, attitude than the pretty visuals. Then there's this rather bizarre picture of a pig-like character in a pink dress and bonnet, holding pistols. Looks like some sort of boss or something. Lard, it says on its chest. Classy stuff. Underneath, they've got sections called favorite levels, like raw meat, which they reckon is good because of plenty of pickups and being easy to get into. Then there's movie set, which they say is trickier for finding weapons, and stadium, which is apparently just a straight up arena for blasting each other. Sounds about right for Duke Nukem really. Simple but fun. War. It also mentions it's from GT Interactive, out now, and costs £55. Blimey, games were pricey back then, and it supports 14 players, controller pack and rumble pack. Those rumble packs were something else, weren't they? Made you feel like you were really in the action, sort of. Sponsored by Interact, it says at the bottom of the game info. Remember them? They did all sorts of peripherals. Overall, it's a pretty standard game review page from back in the day, trying to be a bit edgy, but deep down, it's just telling you if it's worth your hard-earned Christmas money. And 64%? Well, it's not a classic, but probably worth a rent from Blockbuster if you were bored over the holidays. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 10, takes a look at Duke Nukem 64, right in time for Christmas '97. It's got an article called Duke O Hazard, giving us some tips on how to get the most out of blowing up pixelated bad guys. Key. The first bit, it's in the pipeline, is all about using pipe bombs. Apparently these aren't the quickest weapon, but they let you set traps. The reviewer suggests switching to pipe bombs, lobbing one around a corner, and legging it before it goes boom. They even reckon you can spread enemy bits all over the walls, which is lovely. There are a couple of screenshots showing this pipe bomb action, one where Duke is about to drop a pipe bomb and another showing the aftermath, or lack thereof, of the enemy. No trace of your foe to be seen, it says, which is a bit of an exaggeration. You can still see the pixelated floor. Then there's Exocet Body Check, which is about the missile launcher. The tip here is to get up high with the missile launcher and rain down explosive justice. The reviewer, Zai, reckons any poor sod walking underneath will get a face full of missile. Direct hits apparently vaporize your target, but if you aim a bit off you can blow them sideways. Again, we get a screenshot showing the missile in flight. It's all good cheesy fun, isn't it? Parry. Below that there's a section titled Turok or Not, which is a bit of a moan about the controls. Apparently playing PC Duke needed a keyboard and mouse, so 3D Realms had a challenge bringing it to the N64 controller. They've gone for two control setups. One, a Turok style using the analog stick for movement and aim, which Zai prefers. The other uses button movement and analog aim. It sounds like neither is perfect, and getting used to jumping, ducking and switching weapons with the D-pad is a bit fiddly. Zai thinks analog movement and D-pad aiming is okay to start with, but when things get hectic with enemies above and below, it becomes difficult. I can imagine, Duke Nukem games get pretty chaotic. Gorkist. To illustrate the controls, there's a diagram of the N64 controller, with labels for all the buttons. Left shoulder is for inventory, right shoulder for open/jump, the C buttons are for movement, top C is jump and forward, right C is sidestep right, left C is sidestep left, and bottom C is duck/backward. The B button is for scrolling weapons or duck, A is for scrolling weapons or open, and the Z trigger is for fire. The D-pad is for inventory and weapon scrolling, and the analog stick is for movement and aim. Seems a bit of a compromise to get all those PC controls onto the N64 pad. Still, Duke Nukem on the N64 must have been quite a thing back then. This page depicts a review of Duke Nukem 64 from N64 Magazine. Must be an old issue from Christmas time in '97. It's talking about Duke Nukem making the jump from PC to the N64. Remember GoldenEye was all the rage then, and they even say here that GoldenEye was fresher at the time, which is probably spot on. Duke Nukem was a bit of a relic even then, wasn't it? Warrington North. The review mentions Duke being the hero dealing with aliens and dodgy goingson, which is a very British way of putting it. They reckon the multiplayer is the best bit, split screen of course, that was the thing back then. They've even got these little boxes with tips called Lazy Laser and Jetpack Willy, which is a bit of a laugh. Lazy Laser is all about setting trip bombs, and Jetpack Willy is about bombing people from above with pipe bombs. Classic Duke silliness. There's a bit called Pass the Port, going on about how it's an elderly PC game, and how the N64 controller is a bit lacking for it. They say 3D Realms did a good job with the conversion but had to edit out some offensive bits, probably Nintendo being all sensitive as usual. Hater. You get a list of levels too, like Hollywood Holocaust, Gun Crazy, Death Row, Toxic Dump. All those Daft Duke level names. Brings back memories. Sounds like they're saying it's alright, not amazing, but good for a laugh with your mates in multiplayer. Because it's good? Oh, okay then, they've written. Bit sarcastic maybe? Overall it's a decent retro look back at Duke Nukem 64 on the N64. This page depicts a bit of a look at Duke Nukem 64 from back in the day, in N64 Magazine it seems. They're running through the game modes, saying there's more to it than just blasting everything, which, for Duke, is debatable. Single player's got 28 levels of total carnage. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Two-player cooperative is there. Get a mate round, and blast through it together, just watch out for friendly fire, mind you. Then they've got 2- and 4-player deathmatch. Standard stuff, really. Tricks and treats section points out some bits in the levels, like force field doors where you need to find a switch, the shrinker to get into rat tunnels, and squisher traps. Sounds like classic Duke humor. Rumble in the urban jungle. They've called the Rumble Pack bit. Says it's there, but not as subtle as GoldenEye. Surprise, surprise. Then the review scores. Visuals and sounds get a 7, mastery 8, lifespan 9. Verdict is, second to GoldenEye. Well yeah, most things were back then. But apparently, good multiplayer and loads of levels mean Duke Nukem 64 is worth a look. They gave it 86%. They're saying it's a tough game, a good conversion, and holds up against Doom and Turok. Apparently, if GoldenEye hadn't existed, Duke Nukem 64 would have been top dog for shooters on the N64. Still, not a bad effort for old Duke on the N64. This page is an advert for Chameleon Twist in N64 Magazine. Looks like issue 10 Christmas 97. Proper retro stuff. It's got this big orange title, Chameleon Twist, splashed across the middle, can't miss that. Above it there's a bit where it says, "Here's Fred, our chameleon of choice. And he's facing some wobbly spikes." They're asking readers what he should do. Bit daft, really. I suppose you're meant to use your tongue to get past them. That's the gimmick of the game, isn't it, Joyce? Then there's a panel beside it that says, "Don't try this at home," with a chameleon tongue and hedgehogs. Bit weird if you ask me, licking hedgehogs. It says you can swing over them or lick them up. Sounds like typical Japanese game silliness. Weird it. Below the big title, it describes Chameleon Twist as a 3D adventure, where if you're stuck, the answer is most likely on the tip of your tongue. Cheeky. It says you can go around the world in just over an hour. Blimey, that's quick. Games were shorter back then, weren't they? It mentions 6 worlds: Jungleland, Antland, Bombland, Desert Castle, Kidsland, and Ghost Castle. Sounds like a right mixed bag of levels. Jungleland is the first world, gentle intro to tongue skills. Fair enough. Desert Castle is the platform gamey world, with tricky jumping sections and flying carpets. Sounds alright. Kidsland has chocolate and toys, and a distressing room, with impossible moving platforms. Stressful for the little ones maybe. And Bombland is full of bombs, naturally, with chain reactions. They've got screenshots for each of these worlds. They look alright for the time. Bit blocky, mind you, but it's N64. Down the side, there's a Chameleon Twist box with Ocean/Japan System Supply. Remember Ocean? They did some classics back in the day. It's 64 meg, needs a controller pack, 14 players, and it was out then. Out now it says, which would be Christmas 97 then. Price is £59.99. Caller, games were expensive then, weren't they? Sponsored by Interact as well, remember them, they did all the accessories. All in all, looks like a quirky little platformer. Probably not a classic, but might be a laugh for a rental. This page from an old N64 mag looks like it's focusing on Chameleon Twist. Right then, Chameleon Antics, I remember this one. Ruspa. It's titled A Tongueful, which is a bit cheeky, referencing the main gimmick of the game, your lizard's long tongue. Apparently you can use it to lick up baddies, whack them about, or even swing around like Spider-Man on poles, crossing gaps, and generally getting about. Sounds like a proper platformer with a twist, literally. The highlight section points out a few bits of the game that stood out. There's a library bit where the bookcases rotate 90 degrees to become platforms, which is a bit different, isn't it? Then there's some bonus room involving pool tables. You need to pop balls with your tongue for crowns. Sounds a bit daft, but maybe fun for a laugh. They mention the camera being a bit rubbish in that section though, typical N64 camera angles, eh? You to pop. Desert Castle level gets a mention with conveyor belt sand areas and poles to zip about on. And then the most intimidating monsters are these large red ants. Apparently they chase you at alarming speed. Sounds like they were trying to ramp up the tension a bit there. And then there's the scariest bit in the whole game in Ghost Castle. Creeping along narrow planks over a black void while ghosts are chasing you. Proper spooky stuff for a kid's game, I suppose. The review mentions collecting crowns in each world, 25 per world, and if you get 20 you get a sticker on the world map. Very collectathon, typical of the era. They are wondering what happens if you get a sticker on every world, like it's some great mystery, bless them. Or into May era. Overall looks like Chameleon Twist was trying to do something a bit different with the tongue mechanic. Lots of bonus bits and collectibles to keep you busy. Probably a decent rental back in the day when we were starved of N64 games. Takes me back. This page is an article from an old N64 magazine. Feels like Christmas 97, looking at a game called Chameleon Twist. Seems to be all about the multiplayer. Death by 1,000 licks they've called it. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Apparently the multiplayer is where it's at, and the single player is a bit of a letdown. They mention you can pick from Davy, Jack, Fred and Linda as your chameleon characters. Looks like you're in arenas and have to lick each other off the platforms. Classic multiplayer stuff, really. They've got survival matches and time trials, and 8 different arenas to play in. Sounds like it could be a laugh with a few mates round. Graphically, the reviewer isn't too impressed. Says it's all a bit basic, brick walls and scaled sprites. Not like Mario 64, more like PlayStation level, he reckons. Sounds are apparently forgettable too. Mastery is a 3 out of 5, saying any console could do this, which is a bit harsh. Lifespan is middling, better in multiplayer than single player. The verdict is 70%. Good fun, despite looking a bit rubbish, which sums it up nicely, to be honest. They say the multiplayer saves it and gives it long-term potential. He says he even got his mates off Diddy Kong Racing and Automobili Lamborghini to play it, as well as someone off Show and Jump, which sounds like a right laugh. He even thinks it's better than Bomberman 64's multiplayer, which is a bold claim. Then there are screenshots showing the character select screen and some in-game action on platforms, and one with these fiery little fellas. One screenshot caption mentions, reaching the exit to this room is one thing. Getting the crown as well is quite another. There's also a ranking table showing times for different stages like Jungle Land, Toyland, Desert Castle, Kids Land and Ghost Castle, for anyone bothered about speedruns back then. Pituli. Overall, Jonathan Davies, that's the reviewer, thinks it's a decent bit of multiplayer fun for a party, but maybe not worth full price at £59.99, which was a lot of dosh back then. Sounds like one to rent for a weekend with your mates, rather than a must-buy. This page depicts an import game review from N64 Magazine. It seems every game reviewed from this point onwards is a Japanese or US import. Right then, let's see what we have here. It's Puyo Puyo P. It's got this big bold import arena at the side, very flashy. Jikastra. The page is titled Spots Before the Eyes, and they're showing off how to play Puyo Puyo. Looks like they're explaining basic chain reactions, using numbered screenshots. Very helpful for the uninitiated, I suppose. They're calling the little blobs wide-eyed limbless chums. A bit daft if you ask me, but alright. There are some speech bubbles around the page with quotes. One says, Yatta, a tiny ninja in the center jigs to your victory. And another more philosophical one from the angel who sings off-key, says something about postmodern issues, and adrift in a world without values. Which sounds a bit deep for a puzzle game review, doesn't it? Then there's a comment about a bamboo forest skellingbone with scores on doors, which they find not impressive. Sounds like they're having a bit of fun with the Japanese quirks in this import. Warrington. The reviewer, or whoever wrote this bit, is showing off a little 2-player training mode scenario and joking about how their opponent would be muttering, Git! 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 And plotting revenge. Classic competitive puzzling, we've all been there. Overall, it seems like they're saying Puyo Puyo's a good, skillful puzzler, even if it is an import at the moment. Probably worth a look if you're into that sort of thing and have the means to get hold of a Japanese N64 game. This page is all about Puyo Puyo Sun 64, looks like one of those quirky Japanese puzzle games that were doing the rounds back in '97. It's got a big splashy title, Call My Beluff, and some rather odd screenshots. They start off talking about how bonkers the original Japanese version is, and how they probably toned it down for us Brits. There's a mention of little demon cuties in games and how it might confuse the American translators, which is a bit cheeky. They've got a picture of a cute anime girl, apparently she's the star of Puyo Puyo, and they call the Puyos bouncing buddies and wrongdoers, which is a bit of a weird way to put it. Then there's something about a devil girl Satan and a kettle of green tea. It's all a bit out there, isn't it? There's a little box about the game itself, Puyo Puyo Sun 64, saying it's out now in Japan but TBA for the US and UK. 64 meg, cartridge, rumble pack, compatible, the usual stuff. Sponsored by Interact, remember them? They made all sorts of pads and bits. Price is about £28, which wasn't cheap back then. Warrendal. Then there's a bit where they talk about the game itself. Apparently it's a puzzle game where you stack these blobby things. They reckon it's a big hit in Japanese arcades and popular with the ladies apparently. They compare it to Kirby's Ghost Trap and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which we did see on the Mega Drive and SNES, so we kind of know what they're on about. Says it's simple to pick up. Like Tetris, you match colors to make them pop. They talk about chain reactions and how clever it gets. They mention versus mode against the computer, or your mates, and how it can get really intense and frustrating. They say it's Puyo Puyo, still one of the best competitive puzzlers around. Gorbo. Down the side they've got these little boxes with ratings. Accessibility is a bit rubbish apparently, you have to fiddle about to figure things out because of the Japanese weirdness. Visuals get a 2 out of 5, ropey 16-bit visuals, which doesn't sound amazing for the N64 does it? Sounds get a 2 as well. Blip, splop, boyoing, aye. Mastery gets a 1, bit of sarcasm there. Your N64 is practically being used as a SNES emulator. Lifespan gets a 9 though, practically SNES lifespan. If you like 2-player, you'll be at it for years. The verdict is a true classic, very good and very old. Bit backhanded, but they give it 80%, so it can't be that bad. They say it's good despite their reservations about it being on the N64. Reviewer is ZY Nicholson, reckon that's pronounced Zai. Christmas 1997. Blimey, time flies. This page is a review of J-League 11, beat for the N64 from back in the day. Christmas 97, it must have been looking at the issue number. It's from Import Arena section, so this was one of those Japanese games you couldn't just pop down to Electronics Boutique and pick up, you had to know your imports. The review is headlined, "Get this right, there are 11 players, and they need to be, beat." Bit of a lame pun, but they were all doing that back then, Turin. The game itself, J-League 11 beat, sounds a bit of a letdown to be honest. Accessibility is marked down because it's in Japanese obviously. Visually it's got nice high-res surroundings, which is good for the N64, but the players are apparently made of jelly. Sounds rubbish, literally. Dreadful grating music, and ludicrous pinball sound effects, lovely. Mastery gets a dig for visually, yep. Otherwise, this displays no ingenuity at all. Ouch. Lifespan is nigglesome general play and impenetrable options. Doesn't sound like you'd be glued to it for long. The verdict is pretty damning. Lacks both Dynamite Soccer's gradual, involving something, and ISS-64's all-conquering brilliance. Dynamite Soccer was okay, a bit of fun, but ISS-64, or International Superstar Soccer 64, that was the proper footy game on the N64 at the time, so being compared unfavorably to that is not good. The reviewer, Tim Weaver, sums it up as another disappointing Hudson effort, and gives it a measly 52%. There are little captions on the screenshots. One says, "Great strike from the little guy there. Pity, most of the rest of the time he's a useless, fat, dumpy cretin. Harsh, but fair. Bit brutal." Another one mentions, "Choose from a variety of stadiums, all of which are small," and another one points out, "Fouling someone in Beat 11 produces an equally large referee." Seems a bit quirky, but not in a good way. Overall, reading this back then, you probably would have given J-League 11 Beat a miss and stuck with ISS-64. Or maybe hoped for a decent European football game to come out instead. 52%, yeah, that's about right for a duff import title. This page shows an article from N64 Magazine titled, "How to Get Your Head Around Pocket Monsters." It's all about this craze hitting Japan called Pocket Monsters on the Game Boy, apparently breaking records over there. It mentions it's coming to the N64 next year, which would have been intriguing back then, wondering how that would work. The article is written by Max Everingham, and it seems to be an introduction to the game for us Brits. It explains the basic premise. You're one of two kids, red or green, and you collect these pocket monsters. You gotta pick a red or green cartridge when you buy the game, which was a bit of a novelty, deciding right from the get-go. The article mentions you catch these monsters and keep records of their stats. You leave them in Pokemon hotels, which we'd probably call Pokemon centers now, and they become fully grown adults. Apparently they go out and kill everything in sight, or attack it at the very least, which sounds a bit dramatic for Pokemon, even back then. They start with tail strikes and learn to bite, progressing to other attacks. To be the best, you have to fight gym leaders, 8 of them apparently in each town. That's basically the instructions, the rest is up to you. The monsters are categorized by kind and type, like Poison Spine Monster and Double Shell Monster. Bit weird names, but alright. And then elemental types like fire, water, poison and so on. Standard RPG stuff really. They list attributes like offensive and defensive ability, level, height, weight, and what animal they evolved from. The article then talks about trading with mates using a cable. Remember those? At the trade center. That was a big deal at the time, trading monsters. There's a bit of a warning: if you trade with someone higher ranked, your traded monster might just ignore you, which is a bit harsh, innit? There are pictures of the Japanese Pokemon Redbox art and a Game Boy in someone's back pocket. Just to hammer home what we're talking about. Overall, it's trying to explain what all the fuss is about this Pocket Monsters thing, before it properly took off over here. Bit of a heads up for us N64 owners wondering what all the fuss was about on the Game Boy. This page shows an article titled "How to Raise a Monster" from an old N64 magazine. It's all about getting to grips with pocket monsters on the Game Boy, which we now know as Pokemon, of course. It's written as a step-by-step guide for us Brits who might not know any Japanese, which was fair enough back then. The article starts with the reviewer, who is called ZY, holding up the Japanese game box and joking about the big manual for such a small game. Reckon he binned the manual pretty quick. It goes through the very beginning of the game, pressing start and navigating the menus which are all in Japanese. He's just pressing A and hoping for the best, which is what we all did at the time. He's even managed to get past the name entry screen by just fudging something in katakana. There are screenshots showing the game screens as he progresses, from the title screen to getting into the game world and meeting the first character who looks a bit like a doctor. He seems a bit overwhelmed by all the text, saying it's like a billion text screens, which is probably how it felt when you couldn't read any of it. The article also mentions the Pocket Monster merchandise that was already starting to appear, like the card game, plastic monsters, and all sorts of bits and bobs. Apparently, the marketing bods were expecting us to spend a lifetime counting all the different bits of merchandise. At the bottom, there's a Pocket Monster popularity chart section, showing the top 10 most popular Pokemon according to some Japanese survey. Pikachu is at number 1 with a massive lead, then Mew, and Lizardon, who we know as Charizard. It's interesting to see how popular they were even back then. Looks like a full-on Pokemon craze was just kicking off. This page is all about the phenomenon that was Pokemon back in '97, right in time for Christmas it seems. It kicks off with an article called Pikachu Rules OK, talking about how Pikachu is Japan's most popular monster, even more popular than Tony Blair apparently, who was pretty big back then if I recall. It mentions the Pocket Monster game and all the merchandise that was starting to take over, even a catchy song that was driving parents mad. They were even giving away a Pikachu doll that speaks, which sounds a bit much but kids would have loved it. Then there's a section on combat stickers and pick a card, any card, which looks like it's explaining how those Pocket Monster trading cards work. They're compared to lottery scratch cards, and it seems like you get these stickers for the monsters, and the cards have stats and battle zones. Looks a bit like a fancy version of Top Trumps, doesn't it? They've got pictures of cards with monsters like Gyarados and some frog creature and loads of details about offensive and defensive power, elemental type and all that jazz. You had to scratch off boxes to reveal your moves in the battle zone. Sounds like a right faff but probably kept the kids entertained. Et asshole. Finally, there's a bit at the bottom called Monsters in the UK, saying the Game Boy Pocket Monsters game isn't easily available here in the UK, which sounds about right at the time. Things took a while to get over here sometimes. It mentions calling Project K if you were desperate to get your hands on it, but warned it might be tricky if your Japanese wasn't up to scratch. They even had some photos of people playing the card game in a cafe, looking very serious about it, with funny captions like, "The dastardly foe," and, "Ha ha ha, I am Dodorio. I laugh in the face of my enemies." Bit dramatic for a card game in a cafe, but there you go. They even mention reviewer Mr. Hongo and ZY in the articles. Proper old school games journos those were. This page is from the N64 Magazine, issue 10 it seems, and it's a how-to guide for GoldenEye 007. Ah, GoldenEye. Everyone was obsessed with that back in '97, weren't they? This article is promising to help you keep the British end up, whatever that means in a gaming context. Bit cheeky. Baja. The guide is level by level, starting with level 1. Damn. It gives you a cheat code for paintball mode, and a target time to complete it on secret agent difficulty 2 minutes 40 seconds. The guide mentions ignoring guards and alarms, just running through to get the best time. Sounds about right, speedrunning before it was really a thing. Level 2 is facility, and they're suggesting the invincibility cheat with a target time of 2 minutes 5 seconds on 00 agent difficulty. Blimey, 00 agent and invincibility. Bit of a contradiction there lads, isn't it? The guide tells you to run through, take out a few guards and blow up some tanks, all in under 2 minutes. Good luck with that without the cheat, eh? Next up is level 3, runway, recommending DK mode, which is the big head cheat, again with a target time of 5 minutes on agent difficulty. This one's about grabbing the ignition key and getting to the plane in about 35 seconds. They reckon DK mode makes it easier somehow? Probably just makes it funnier to watch Bond with a massive head, if I remember rightly. Finally, level 4, surface, and it's the 2x grenade launcher cheat, with a secret agent difficulty time of 3 minutes 30 seconds. The guide says to just blast through, ignoring the sniper and using the silence PP7 and grenade launcher. 10 seconds to spare, apparently. Tight margins. Orch. Overall it's a classic cheat guide from a gaming mag. Back then, these were gold dust, weren't they? Before the internet made everything instantly available. If you were stuck on GoldenEye, this page would have been ripped out and stuck by the telly for sure. Good times. This page is all about GoldenEye 007 on the N64. Proper classic that. It's from the N64 how-to section, and they're giving tips for getting through a couple of levels in the game. First up is level 5, Bunker. They reckon you should use the 2x rocket launcher's cheat, which sounds like a bit of overkill for the bunker, even on agent difficulty. The time to beat is 4 minutes apparently. They say it's another close shave, but no special time-saving action is needed. You just gotta complete the objectives and know the level layout in advance. Fair enough, layout knowledge is key in GoldenEye, innit? The screenshot says Bond, disable the security, probably something obvious you need to do. Then there's level 6, Silo. For this one they suggest using turbo mode, which again, sounds a bit much. Difficulty is agent, and the time is 3 minutes. They're telling you to run like the wind, grab door cards from scientists, and only shoot the bare minimum of guards. Sounds like they want you to avoid combat where you can, and just leg it through. They mention there's armor to pick up, and it'll be tight, but hopefully doable with seconds to spare. The whole page is themed around GoldenEye, with a massive image of Pierce Brosnan looking all suave and serious. Down at the bottom there's a go, 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 with the N64 logo, and the page number 79, dated Christmas, 1997. Ah, Christmas 97, GoldenEye was still the absolute must-have game then. Good times. This page then is one of those how-to guides from N64 Magazine, and this time it's all about GoldenEye 007 naturally. Everyone was banging on about GoldenEye back then, weren't they? It's breaking down a few of the levels with some tips and cheats to help you finish them quickly. We're looking at levels like Frigate, Surface 2, Bunker, Statue, Archives, and Streets. For each level, they give you a cheat suggestion. The difficulty setting, mostly Secret Agent or 00 Agent for the really brave, and a target time to aim for. Then there's a little bit of text giving you the gist of the level, and a screenshot to jog your memory. For Frigate, they're suggesting no radar, in multiplayer cheeky. Surface 2's got Tiny Bond, sounds daft, probably just for a laugh. Bunker is 2 throwing knives on Agent, which seems a bit easy if you ask me. Statue's got fast animation, which is probably handy for a speed run. Then there's invisibility for Archives, well that's always useful, isn't it? And finally, enemy rockets for Streets, which must be the tank level. Everyone loved a bit of tank action. They reckon you can do Frigate in 4 minutes 30 on Secret Agent, Surface 2 in 4:15 on 00 Agent, Bunker in 1:30 on Agent, Statue in 3:15 on Secret Agent, Archives in a mere 1:20 on 00 Agent, and Streets in 1:45 on Agent. Mad times really, especially on the harder difficulties. Remember trying to shave seconds off your time to impress your mates? Good times, good times. Probably spent more time trying to get these times than actually playing the game properly. Still, you couldn't move for GoldenEye tips in 97, could you? This page is alright, straight to the point, no messing about. This page delves into the world of GoldenEye 007 on the N64, back when we were all trying to be proper secret agents, or at least survive past the first few guards. It's giving us the lowdown on levels 13 through 18, so we're getting into the meat of the game here. For each level, like Depot, Train, Jungle, Control, Caverns and Cradle, they're suggesting a cheat, which isn't really a cheat code as such, more like a level-specific tip to aim for, and then the difficulty level, which is Secret Agent or 00 Agent naturally. They even give you target completion times, as if anyone could actually stick to those religiously. Nisas. Level 13. Depot. The cheat is slow animation, which sounds intriguing. Level 14. Train suggests Silver PP7, probably to get that fancy silence pistol early, always a good shout. Level 15. Jungle. It's 2x hunting knives for those stealthy types, or maybe just for a laugh. Level 16. Control offers infinite ammo, well that's always helpful for blowing up everything in sight. Level 17. Caverns. It's 2 tanks RCP-90s, because who doesn't love dual-wielding machine guns? And finally, level 18. Cradle. The cheat is Gold PP7, another shiny pistol to collect. There are also some general how-to tips, like shake it to the left, reminding us to sidestep, you know, strafing for the youngsters, and the whites of their eyes pushing headshots, which were always satisfying in GoldenEye. Then they've got glitches and quirks sections, because back then finding bugs in games was half the fun. Apparently you could blow up remote mines without the detonator, which sounds a bit risky, and make floating mines. The quirks bit is about testing the scientists in the facility level to see if they're the one who'll pull a gun on you. Bit cruel really, but hey, it's Bond. Overall, it's a classic GoldenEye tips page from back in the day. Reminds you of poring over these magazines, trying to get every advantage you could. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, back in the Christmas of '97, is giving us the lowdown on how to tackle a couple of levels in GoldenEye 007. GoldenEye, what a game that was, really changed console shooters, didn't it? Anyway, this page is all about level 19, Aztec, and level 20, Egypt. It's got walkthroughs for both, with objectives listed, cheat codes if you were that way inclined, secret agent mode in 9 minutes, with double laser pistols. Cheeky! It walks you through each step of the Aztec level, telling you how to deal with those Moonraker guards, and even Jaws himself. Remember him? Nasty piece of work. Apparently you just gotta get up close and blast him for as long as possible. Helpful. Cheers Magazine. Warrington Noah. Then there's Egypt, which is all about finding the golden gun, and taking down Baron Samedi. Seems like there's some kind of square tile puzzle to get to the golden gun, and the drone guns conveniently die when you get it. Bit of a giveaway, eh? On the other side, it's got a section for multiplayer GoldenEye, which, let's be honest, was where we all spent most of our time, wasn't it? It's listing armor and golden gun locations for a few of the multiplayer maps: caves, water caverns, temple and complex. So if you were struggling to find that golden gun in complex, apparently it's in the corridor opposite the yellow passageway on the first floor. Handy to know. They even point out the color-coded passageways to help you track other players. Smart thinking. Yellow, Looking at the screenshots, yeah, it all comes flooding back. Blocky polygons, but we didn't care back then, did we? It was amazing at the time. Good times, good times. This page is a proper little guide to get you through some of the trickier bits of GoldenEye, just what you needed back in the day when the internet wasn't as, well, everything as it is now. This page from N64 Magazine, back in Christmas of '97, is a right little guide for GoldenEye 007. Remember that, eh? Everyone was obsessed with it. It's got some how-to tips to keep the British end up in GoldenEye 007, cheeky as you like. There are location guides for armor and the golden gun across a few levels. They're talking about library, basement, stack, all mixed together as one, facility, archives and bunker. Standard levels really, if a bit blocky looking back now. Then there's a bit about the characters. Apparently Jaws is easier to headshot because of his big head. Who knew? And Oddjob is small and hard to hit. Classic Oddjob really. Always a pain in multiplayer. It reminds you to keep an eye on the armor in each level, which is just common sense really, and a tip about everyone picking the same character in multiplayer. Not something I ever bothered with. There's a bit about using the scenery, shooting explosive things near enemies. Quite obvious when you think about it. And a line about doors, saying the best weapons shoot right through them, like the Cougar Magnum, AR-33, or RCP-90. Very helpful. Asher. Then there's a walkthrough for the Egyptian level. Step 2 is about getting out of the golden gun room, grabbing some armor, and then dealing with Baron Samedi. He's in a white top hat and tails, proper villain style. Shoot him, naturally. Apparently he comes back with Moonraker lasers after you shoot him the first time with his Cougar Magnums, bit of an upgrade for him. Step 3 is about going off to another room, more armor, and facing Samedi again in a smaller temple. He's back for more, the stubborn bloke. Apparently proper dead this time, or is he? They always left it open-ended, didn't they back then? Yeah, good old GoldenEye, everyone was playing it. Simpler times. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 10, is all about how to, well, tart up your Nintendo 64 with some, shall we say, interesting bits of plastic. It's Tim Weaver giving us the lowdown, just in time for Christmas of '97, because apparently Santa needed a helping hand in deciding what tack to go with for our beloved consoles. The headline screams, "Accessorize your N64," in a very loud orange, and it's got a picture that's basically a spaghetti junction of wires and controllers, all tangled around the N64 itself. Right in the middle we can see a copy of Super Mario 64 poking out of the top, which, let's be honest, was probably the only game you actually needed back then. There's also some cartridge labeled Game Killer. Sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? And Ultra 64 spy cards, not sure what that's about. Looking at all this plastic tat around the console, you've got your racing wheels, because Gran Turismo 64 wasn't a thing yet, but clearly, someone thought we needed to pretend we were driving F1 cars with those clunky things. Then there are these flight stick jobbies, probably for Pilot Wings or that Star Wars game, Rogue Squadron I think it was. Dooku. Controller-wise, it's a real mixed bag. You've got your standard grey N64 controller, thank goodness, but then there's this clear purple one, the SharkPad Pro 64, and a SuperPad 64, and even a Trident Pro Pad. Goodness knows what they were like to actually use compared to the proper Nintendo one, probably a bit rubbish if we're honest, but hey, more buttons and turbo fire, right? And is that one actually called Spook? Bit of a weird name for a controller if you ask me. It's all a bit of a reminder of the days when everyone was trying to cash in on the N64 hype with all sorts of add-ons. Whether any of this stuff actually improved your gaming experience is debatable, but it certainly gave you something to ask Santa for. Simpler times. This page is about choosing the right controller for your N64, because let's face it, if you're playing GoldenEye or Mario Kart with your mates, you need more than one pad, and nobody wants to be stuck with a rubbish one. They've tested a few third-party options here alongside the official Nintendo controller. First up is the Spook Pad for £30, which they absolutely slate. Apparently, it's hideous, the buttons are sticky, and the analog stick is awful, needing a microscope to even find. Ouch! They reckon it's the worst of the lot. Then there's the Shark Pad Pro, also at £30. This one looks a bit better in the picture, transparent plastic and all that. They say the buttons are alright, and it looks okay, but it's uncomfortable to hold thanks to some legal shenanigans that made it lose its prongs. Sounds a bit dodgy. Next is the Trident Pad at £20. This one is described as having a clean look and a good analog stick. The D-pad is apparently a bit rough, but overall they say it's worth considering, especially for the price. The LX4 controller for £25 is next. They reckon this one is poorly designed and uncomfortable, with a dodgy analog stick that moves even if you're not touching it. Absolute piffle is the reviewer's word, which is quite harsh. The SuperPad 64 feet at just £15 is mentioned, and you can get a plus version with autofire and slow motion. They don't seem too keen on the extra features, saying they are a waste of time and just flash menus all over the screen. They suggest saving your money and getting a basic controller. Finally, they review the Arcade Shark for a whopping £60. 60 quid for a controller back then. Bleemy. They say it's good for ISS64, which is Pro Evo Soccer to you and me, because the joystick is great, but it's a nightmare for Mario Kart because you can't reach the L and R buttons. The Z trigger is badly placed too. Sounds like an expensive mistake. And lastly, there's the official Nintendo controller, also £30. No surprises here, they say it's the best. Comfortable, good analog stick, nice buttons, and overall just a solid pad. They reckon it's worth the extra if your parents are paying. It's got a best value N64 badge on it too. Probably the one to go for if you want to be sure you're getting something decent, even if it is a bit pricey. Overall, sounds like a mixed bag of controllers out there. Maybe stick to the official one unless you fancy a gamble. This page from N64 Magazine is having a look at some add-ons for your brand spanking new N64. First up, it's steering wheels. Because who doesn't want to pretend they are Nigel Mansell when playing Mario Kart? They've got 3 on test here: the V3 steering wheel, the Gamester wheel, and the Top Gear Logic 3. The V3 steering wheel, at £80, sounds a bit steep, but it's got all the bells and whistles, adjustable turning, and loads of buttons apparently, so you can map everything to your liking. They reckon the pedals are a bit too light though, so you might be chasing them across the carpet. Next is the Gamester wheel, also £80. Blimey, these things were pricey. The reviewer, Zai, is not impressed. Sounds like it's got a notch in the middle of the steering, gear changes are clunky, and apparently, it looks like something you made in metalwork class at school. Ouch. The pedals are also too heavy apparently, so you can't win with this one. Worry. Finally, the Top Gear Logic 3, at £70. A tenner cheaper than the others, and it sounds like it's the best of the bunch. Comfier, better steering, and even a leather effect rim fancy. Plus it works with PlayStation and Saturn too, so if you were a multi-console household, this could have saved you a few quid, although who had multiple consoles back then, eh? They've slapped a Best Performance award on it, so it must be decent. They do say none of them are really essential though for games like Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing, which is probably true. Good old analog stick did the job just fine for those. But for something like Top Gear Rally or Automobili Lamborghini, maybe these wheels would add a bit more realism if you were really wanting to get into it. Then they move on to memory cards. Remember those? Because the N64 cartridges themselves didn't save games, you needed these little add-ons. They reckon there's loads of third-party ones kicking about. They're highlighting 2 here: the Daytel 1 Meg Pack and the Nintendo Controller Pack. The Daytel 1 Meg Pack is £12 and boasts a massive 1 megabyte of storage. Sounds like it's a bit different because it's not split into pages like some others, which they reckon is a good thing. They say Datel's cards are usually reliable, so that's good to know. Worries. The Nintendo Controller Pack, at £15, is a bit more expensive and only 256k, so much smaller than the Datel. But it's Nintendo's own, so you'd hope it's reliable. They are planning a proper test of memory cards in the next issue, so we'll have to wait and see which one comes out on top in the long run, but for now, it sounds like the Nintendo one is the safer bet, if a bit pricey for what you got. Especially if you were recording your Mario Kart Ghost data to show off to your mates. This page. Right then, let's have a look at this, shall we? It's all about bits and bobs for your N64 back in Christmas '97. Helpful if you were hinting for presents, I suppose. First up, vibration packs. Remember those? Is it worth having a rumble pack, they ask? Well, yes, for a laugh. Wasn't essential though. They've got 3 reviewed here. The official Nintendo Rumble Pack, unsurprisingly, gets the best performance nod. Sounds top quality, but heavy and battery powered, which was a pain. Then there's the Game Master Pack, which gets best value for money. Apparently it's not as rumbly as the Nintendo one, but it's lighter and doesn't need batteries, which is a bonus. And lastly, the Tremor Pack Rack, which they say is a bit weaker on the Rumble front, but hey, no batteries again, and a battery saving switch. Switches on Rumble packs, fancy that. Wire. Then we move on to adapters/cheat cartridges. Blimey, remember all this faff? First, the Ultra 64 Universal Game Adapter from Fire/Blaze. This was for playing those import games, American and Japanese ones. They say it's the best they've tried, but warns it can mess with your save data, especially on games like Mario and Lilac Wars. Bit risky then. Gets an 8 out of 10. Next, the Game Killer from Daytel. 30 quid to cheat in games? Bit much really. Sounds like it writes cheat data directly to your game cart. For stuff like Mario 64 and Pilot Wings. They reckon there's no point unless you're lazy. Ha! 4 out of 10. Rightly so. And finally, the Action Replay. Also Daytel. For 50 quid. This one's a bit more subtle with temporary action codes for things like infinite lives. Apparently, it comes with codes for early N64 games, and more are coming. They admit games are more fun played properly, but still give it a 7 out of 10. Sounds like ZY, the reviewer, was a bit tempted by the dark side of cheating, eh? Overall, a right mixed bag of bits and bobs to accessorize your N64, some useful, some less so, and all a bit pricey. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's delving into the essential and not so essential bits and bobs you could get for your Nintendo 64. Right at the top, it's all about leads. Back in '97, getting the best picture was a proper faff, wasn't it? They're talking Svideo leads. Apparently Spook's effort for 7 quid was the best, getting a solid 9 out of 10, while Fire/Blaze was a bit pricier and a bit less impressive. Then there's SCART leads, which were all the rage if you wanted a decent picture back then, and again Spook comes out on top with another 9/10. RF units are mentioned too. Seems like they were a bit of a last resort and not really worth the money, unless you were properly stuck. And then controller cable extensions, a bit of a daft idea really. I mean, the standard cables were plenty long enough, weren't they? But Spook, Spectra Video and Fire did them if you were desperate to play in the garden, I suppose. Moving on to luggage, which is basically bags to carry your N64 around. First up is the N64 System Carry Case Deluxe from Nintendo themselves, costing a hefty 30 quid. They reckon it's alright, well made and all that, with space for games and memory cards, giving it a respectable 8/10. Then there's the N64 Control Pad Carry Case for 13 quid, which sounds utterly pointless. I mean, who needs a separate bag just for controllers? They give it a measly 4/10, and basically say don't bother, get another controller instead. Finally, there is the Game Multi-Case from Spectra Video for 20 quid, and they seem quite keen on this one, giving it 8/10. It's described as a bit like something from Grange Hill, maybe a bit retro looking even back then. It seems roomy with pockets for games and bits and bobs, and they reckon it's good value. Lastly, under EXTRAS we've got Nintendo mouse mats for 6 quid. Bit random for a console, isn't it? Apparently they're colourful and good quality, featuring Mario, Bowser and Mario Kart characters. They get a 7/10, described as fairly good next to your old pewter. And finally, Nintendo wristpads, costing 7 quid. These sound like a proper gimmick. If you get a dodgy wrist from mashing buttons, apparently these are meant to help. They get a dismal 3/10, and the reviewer basically calls them pointless and weird. So overall, a mixed bag of accessories then, some useful, some not so much, typical 90s gaming tat really. This page has a couple of interesting bits on it. On the left, there's an advert, or feature, under the headline, Help Wanted. N64 Magazine is looking for experts to write game guides, offering excellent rewards, which sounds intriguing back then, probably a free jacket or something. They are inviting readers to share their gaming knowledge. It mentions if your guide is chosen for publication, you get a stylish jacket from their winter collection, always a bonus. Kakari. On the right side of the page, the main feature is a how-to guide, all about how to triumph repeatedly in LYLAT Wars battle mode. Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as it's known to some, was a massive game back in '97. Everyone was buzzing about it. This article promises to reveal secrets from Daniel Glenfield and Nathan Oliver, supposedly readers who've spent ages playing it. They reckon even if you've rinsed the single player and got all the gold medals, the battle mode has loads more to offer, enough to keep you going for weeks. Apparently, these two lads have uncovered everything after many hours of playing. They're even getting N64 Magazine jackets for their efforts, probably the same stylish jacket from the Help Wanted section, tying it all together nicely. There's a screenshot showing a few R-Wings battling it out. Looks like typical Star Fox 64 battle mode action. It's good to see them focusing on a specific aspect of a game rather than trying to cover everything. Makes the guide more useful, I suppose. They give some rules for submitting guides, saying it should be around 2,000 words of expert advice, focused on one area of a game, and not to worry too much about pictures. They even give an address to send your contributions, and mention you should include your name, address, and t-shirt size for your jacket, assuming you get published. It ends by saying Daniel and Nathan are getting their second guide published this month, and to hurry up before they get smothered by N64 jackets. A bit of light-hearted fun there. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's from the Christmas '97 issue, and it's all about getting stuck into the battle mode on Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as it's known over in the States. They're breaking down the different ways to play against your mates. Which is fair enough because that battle mode was a right laugh back in the day. So you've got Point Match, which sounds like your classic deathmatch affair, where you just keep blasting each other until someone hits the score limit. Then there's Battle Royal, which they say is for shorter games, and the tip is to basically hide and grab power-ups before going in for the kill, sneaky. And lastly, Time Trial, which is described as the mode for those who usually lose, cheeky. Apparently it's like the all-range levels where you're just shooting down enemy fighters. Sounds a bit dull compared to battling your mates. They're also highlighting the Nova Bombs, explaining the damage differences depending on whether you're in an R-Wing, Landmaster, or on foot. Presumably that's a typo and they mean when you eject. Bit weird to be fighting on foot in Star Fox. And homing Nova Bombs are also mentioned, just lock on and B button apparently, simple as that. Lastly there's a tip to check the odds first, which is basically saying have a quick peek at your opponent's screen to see if they've got a Nova Bomb ready to go before you start a scrap. Bit of underhanded tactics there, but all's fair in love and Lilac Wars I suppose. This page in the magazine is having a look at the multiplayer arenas for what must be Star Fox 64, remember that? Proper Rumble Pack game that was. They're talking about Sector Z, Corneria and Katina. Sector Z, it seems the reviewer, ZY, isn't too impressed with it, calling it disappointing due to being a bit small, though they do mention the space debris as cover, and the dark background making it hard to see enemies. Corneria gets the thumbs up, apparently the best arena, with pyramids, pillars and arches, and a blue sky so you can actually see what's going on, plus power-ups. Katina is just for time trials, a bit of a barren place, but good for seeing enemies, and they even tell you the best spots to be in depending on whether you're on foot, in the Landmaster or R-Wing, all around the pyramid unsurprisingly. They've also put in some basic tips, like watching your mate's screen to stop sneak attacks, and aiming in front of vehicles if you're missing your shots. Probably handy advice for some back then. We were all still figuring out this 3D gaming business really. This page depicts a spread in N64 Magazine. Looks like one of the How to Triumph Repeatedly articles. It's all about the vehicles in what must be Star Fox 64, or Lilac Wars as we called it here. Remember that one? Proper blast, wasn't it? First up is the R-Wing, which they reckon is the best vehicle, no surprise there really, it's the iconic one. They go on about its vast repertoire of maneuvers, and being the most accurate shooter. Bit much, isn't it? But yeah, it was pretty good. They mentioned doing U-turns and somersaults, all that good stuff. Apparently barrel rolls are useful. If someone is trying to shoot you when you somersault, who knew? And if someone else somersaults over you, tap Z or R, as a precaution apparently. Right then, PE. Next up is the Landmaster tank. They call it nippy, which is pushing it a bit. It was hardly nippy, was it? Still, they say it's good for collisions and going up buildings, which is fair enough. They point out it's vulnerable from players on foot, which is interesting. Guess you need to get those medals on Venom for that, the hard route of course. Lock breakers are mentioned, rolls again, and the sixpence turn, which is holding Z/R, and turning left/right, good to know. Run 'em down tactic is there too, standard Landmaster stuff, run over people on foot and laugh, cheeky. And some eating dust comment about R-Wings being faster, well yeah, obviously. Escape technique by heading up a pyramid, sounds a bit desperate to me if you're being chased in a tank. Then there's a section on being on foot. Bit of a novelty this, they say. Yeah, it was a bit daft really, you were at a disadvantage, weren't you? No boost, no homing shots, tricky firing they reckon. Still, with practice you could apparently take out even the best players. Controls are listed. A for fire, B for Nova Bomb, Z for jump, R for run, C buttons do nothing, and joystick for moving and aiming. Anti-lock device, making you invincible to lock-ons apparently, fancy that. Faster fire by tapping A, surprise, surprise by hiding behind a pillar or spinning around a pyramid. Jump to avoid shots and Landmaster, and even more dust, if you're too slow for R-Wings, cut them off, yeah right. Then the classic, I can see my house from here. Tactic for the top of pyramids, good strategic point apparently. And finally, run and round in circles and shoot. Classic. There are some screenshots dotted about, showing the R-Wing and Landmaster in action, and some bloke on foot, all looking very polygonal, naturally. And there are boxes of text giving tips, like, but you didn't have a lock-on, for firing charged shots without lock-on, and go low to disappear from radar, and, but how did you find me, for radar location. Standard tips for the time, really. Josh, all in all, looks like a decent little guide to the vehicles in Star Fox 64, or Lilac Wars, whatever you want to call it. Probably helped a few folks back then, though most of us just figured it out by playing, didn't we? This page of N64 Magazine, back from when Christmas in '97 was looming, is dishing out some pro-gamer advice, eh? Right then, what have we got? First up, Clay Fighter 63 1/3, remember that one? Proper silly fighting game it was. Apparently there's secret characters, like Boogerman and Dr. Kiln. Sounds about right for Clay Fighter, doesn't it? They even tell you how to unlock them with button combos, proper cheat codes back then. Sumo Santa gets a mention too, jolly fella. Then there's Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some might call it. Nintendo at its best, that was. They're giving tips for beating the first boss on Corneria, saying there's freebies to be had if you fly about a bit cheeky between its legs. Extra lives and bombs and silver rings, oh my. And a tip for multiplayer, hiding from your mates on radar by flying low, sneaky, warring ticks. Last up, GoldenEye 007. Now that game, that was a revolution, wasn't it? 4-player deathmatches on the N64 were the absolute business. This tip is for making everyone look the same in multiplayer. Bit of a laugh when you can't tell who's who, mind you. Probably ends in chaos. Apparently, messing about with the player numbers is the trick. Classic GoldenEye tips, always something to discover. Sheshu. So there you have it, a little slice of N64 gaming wisdom from '97. Good times. This page showcases the reader's top 10 tips from N64 Magazine, proper retro stuff for Christmas '97. It's a collection of little nuggets, sent in by readers, cheats and tips for various N64 games. Right at the top, number 1 is for Mario Kart 64, Luigi Raceway, to be precise. It's a multiplayer shortcut, involving some crafty driving through the sand and nudging player 2 through a wall. Sounds a bit cheeky, typical Mario Kart shenanigans really. There's a couple of screenshots showing the exploit in action. Ball Secca. Number 2 is another GoldenEye 007 tip, this time for remote mines. Attaching a mine to an ammo box or body armor to make it disappear but still blow up when someone grabs it. Sneaky! GoldenEye was massive back then, everyone was obsessed with finding every little trick. Rutin. Tip number 3 is for Blast Core on Diamond Sands. It's about destroying 2 sets of buildings quickly, involving some power sliding around gas containers. Blast Core. Proper destruction game that was. Remember the Ramdozer? Good times? Taisei. Then we have another GoldenEye tip, number 4, for getting 2 sets of paired weapons. It involves some button combo magic to trick the weapon cycling system. A bit convoluted, but if it gets you dual-wielded weapons in GoldenEye, probably worth it. Hera. Number 5 is back to Blast Core, this time on Oyster Harbor. It's about skipping crates and driving straight through the TNT area with the Ramdozer. Always fun to find ways to cheese those levels. Warrior. Number 6 is yet another GoldenEye tip, this one for the bunker level. It's a way to get hunting knives at the start by using the watch magnet and shooting it upwards. Sounds a bit fiddly, but again, knives in GoldenEye, always good to have. There's a dark screenshot of the bunker level here too, brings back memories of tense multiplayer matches. Mario Kart 64 is back again at number 7, this time for Calamari Desert, using a star to blast through a train crossing and stay ahead for the next lap. Classic star power trickery. New 2. Number 8 is for Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some of us called it. It's about getting extra points on Aquas by defeating Oyster Boss in a specific way. Lilac Wars was amazing, proper on-rail shooter, do a barrel roll and all that. Pilot Wing 64 tip at number 9 for Chicken Dive Test. It's a spin trick for the hang glider, involving pulling up and pushing down on the stick. Pilot Wing's a bit of a chilled out game compared to the rest, remember the hang glider controls were a bit floaty. There's a screenshot of the character selection screen. Finally, number 10 is for Lilac Wars again, for infinite lives against Andros on the hard route. Take a right turn, then a left, and if you die you get stuck in an infinite lives loop. Andros was a bit of a creepy end boss, all polygons and roaring. At the bottom, there's a Your Top Tip section, inviting readers to send in their own tips and cheats for a chance to win an N64 badge, or even a SharkPad Pro if you get the number 1 spot. You could fill in the form and send it off to N64 Magazine in Bath. Those were the days, clipping out forms from magazines. This page depicts a classic slice of gaming advice from the N64 magazine, back in the day when you actually had to phone a hotline if you were stuck in a game. Can you imagine? It's all about the Nintendo hotline, presented as the place to go if you're having gaming problems, and apparently, N64 magazine is printing favorite queries, which is a bit of a clever way to fill pages, isn't it? The main game feature here is Top Gear, and they've got the courses broken down, looking at coastline, desert, and jungle tracks. Coastline is marked as easy, and for the first season only, and they recommend a Type ES car. Shortcuts are mentioned, taking a right after the first turn, finding a hole after the first tunnel, and using a fence after the second shortcut. Desert, difficulty medium, and second season Type CE car, is a long course with canyons and few straightaways. Jungle is also easy, first season Type ES car, with straights, a tunnel, and a Mayan pyramid. Shortcuts involve tire tracks after a balloon billboard, and taking the lower road near the end. It's all pretty straightforward stuff, the kind of thing you'd pore over before a race to get any edge. Remember trying to memorize these tips while your mates were already halfway through a race? Simpler times. This page from N64 magazine, it's a bit of a tips page for Top Gear Rally, innit? Right in time for Christmas '97, good timing that. They're calling it a hotline page, probably trying to be helpful for us lots, stuck over the holidays with nothing but our N64. So, Top Gear Rally, remember that one? It was alright, I suppose. They're saying here one of the best things about it is the physics, how the cars handle on different surfaces. Bit rich coming from them. Remember how twitchy those early N64 racers could be? Still, they reckon to just keep the accelerator pinned and stay off the brakes. Easier said than done when you're careening into a Scandinavian flick at 80 miles an hour in low poly graphics. They've got some general tips, mostly common sense stuff. Use the shortcuts, don't go off-road unless you know where you're going, especially in the rain or snow when you can't see a thing. And on the desert stage, they reckon to ease off the gas when you hit a jump, might help stop you flying off into the digital wilderness. Then there's a game secrets bit, of course there is. Apparently there's 2 hidden courses, strip mine and mirror strip mine, and a couple of hidden cars, a milk truck and a helmet. Sounds about right, bit of daftness for the kids. They're also laying out which cars are best for each season. Spring is Type ES or Type LD, summer is Type IP or Type CE, fall is Type SP or M3, and winter, seasons 4, 5 and 6 are Type NS, RS and PS. Type designations, very technical. To get the milk float you just need to finish season 6 in the first year. The helmet car needs season 6 done on the second year. And for the strip mine hidden stage you need to come first in every race in the first year. Mirror strip mine is the same, but in the second year. Blimey, a lot of effort for a slightly different coloured mine. Course descriptions are there too. Mountain is hard, lots of turns and power slides. Best car is the Type M3 for season 3 only, which is very specific. Strip mine is medium. They say it's a large strip mine with beaches and heavy machinery. Best car is the Type RS. Shortcuts for mountain are after the lake. Look for the yellow sign, and take the right turn on the road for the shortcut. Strip mine has no specific shortcuts, but multiple pathways. Cryptic. And that's your lot. A little guide to Top Gear Rally. Probably helped a few folks out over Christmas, or at least gave them something to read while they were waiting for their turn on the N64. Good old N64 mag, always there with the tips. This page is all about chasing high scores on the N64, proper retro stuff, eh? It's the I'm the best section in the magazine, and it's got readers sending in their top scores for bragging rights, and a chance to win a SharkPad Pro controller. Remember those? Quality bit of kit back in the day, even if it was third party. Nor so has he. They're focusing on a few games here, mainly Super Mario 64 and Wave Race 64. For Mario they've got leaderboards for Foot Race with Cooper the Quick and Peach Slide. Both PAL and American/Japanese versions bit keen, aren't they? Seems like Stelios Giamarollos from Greece is a bit of a whiz, topping the Peach Slide chart and showing up a few times in other categories too. Good on him. For Wave Race 64 they've got Trial Sunny Beach, Stunt Mode Dolphin Park, and Glacier Park Time Trial. Again, PAL and American/Japanese leaderboards to keep everyone happy. Looks like Andrew Mills from Londonderry is doing well in Wave Race, and Norman Obaseki from Leeds is showing up a few times too. Fair play lads. Warrington. There's also a little section called Star Performance, talking about someone called Laurie from Bath who apparently completed Doom 64 and sent in a video of it. Bit keen to video yourself completing a game, weren't we all a bit weird back then? They're sending him some N64 goodies for his efforts. Down at the bottom there's a this month score to beat for Star Fox, or Lilac Wars as we knew it over here. They want your total number of hits on level 1 Corneria. 263 is the score to beat. Might have to dust off the old Rumble pack and give that a go myself actually, for a laugh. They're even letting you enter if you call yourself, I'm a top Lilac pilot or I'm a Lilac Wars wizard. Bit cheesy, but that's magazines for you. You had to send your entries in by December 15th, so that boat's sailed now, hasn't it? All in all, classic stuff, getting competitive on the N64. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine writes the club pages, the letters section, always a good bit of reading back in the day. U. Warrington. First off, there's a letter called Recognizing. Someone's writing in to praise this Andrew bloke who's apparently always topping the high score tables in the mag. Sounds like a bit of a show-off, doesn't it? But fair play to him, I suppose. And Rare are getting a mention for everything, cryptic as always. Then there's Fruit Loop. This fella's excited, because he's read in Digitizer. Remember that on Channel 4? That the N64 price is dropping to under 50 quid. He's saying it's great news for new buyers but a bit rough for those who paid £150 already. He reckons it'll make the N64 the best console going, which, well, at that price it was getting tempting. Bit dramatic calling people complete Fruit Loops if they buy other consoles though, eh? Bottom is about the I'm the best high score table again, and someone complaining about unconfirmed scores being listed. Rightly so, bit pointless having them if they're not verified, isn't it? Ed, the editor, says fair point and they'll only include confirmed scores from now on. Good on 'em for listening to the readers. Caterpillar is a blast from the past talking about Blast Corps. This reader remembers seeing early screenshots of Blast Corps, or Blast Dozer as it was known back then, in Superplay magazine. He spotted different vehicles in older screenshots, a Scorpion-like thing and one with Caterpillar tracks, compared to what we got in the final game. Wondering why Rare dropped them, Ed's reply is a bit vague. Early experimental vehicles that never made it into the final version. Sounds about right, games change during development, doesn't it? There's a screenshot of Blast Corps there too, looking very orange and explodey, just as you'd expect. Finally, Z-Trigger is about the Blast Corps Z-Trigger cheat, the one that's supposed to let you demolish whole buildings. This reader and his mate can't get it to work. Ed says that's because Rare fixed the glitch in the PL version, so UK gamers are out of luck for that particular bit of mayhem. Oyster Harbour properly it is then. And at the top, there's the usual write to us bit, with the address for sending in your letters. Any letter printed wins a prized N64 Magazine badge. Oh, the excitement. Still, we all wanted one, didn't we? Warrington. Overall, standard letters page stuff, bit of reader interaction, a touch of game news, and a bit of Blast Corps nostalgia. Good times. This page from the magazine is all about readers' letters and ideas, typical stuff for these mags back in the day. Kicking off at the top left, there's a bit about KASOMA, which is someone getting really into the planet names from Star Fox 64. You know, trying to make sense of the gibberish, good on them for trying. Then there's a couple of letters raving about Star Fox 64, called Grinning and Amazed. Seems like everyone was absolutely blown away by it back then, and rightly so, it was pretty special at the time. One bloke was even saying it's perfection and he's not been that amazed since Mario 64, which is high praise indeed. Another one's saying to go out and buy it if you didn't already. It was that good, I suppose. Lower down, 19-year-old, is a letter moaning about too many reviews of Japanese and American games, and not enough love for British games in the mag. Fair point, I guess. We were always a bit touchy about that in the UK gaming scene. Ed, the editor, basically says they review pale games and import games, and they'll try to keep everyone happy. The usual editor response, really. There's another short letter called Andros, where someone is having a pop at Slippy Toad from Star Fox 64. Saying he's useless. Haha, yeah, Slippy was a bit of a liability, wasn't he? Bless him. Over on the right side, under the big Dream On title, it's all game ideas from readers. First up, Cricket 64. Someone suggesting a cricket game for the N64 after playing International Superstar Soccer 64. They're saying there weren't many good cricket games about, which is probably true, although they do mention Super International Cricket on the SNES and Brian Lara Cricket on the Mega Drive. Ed seems a bit lukewarm on the idea, not convinced it's a winner. Next is Sim and Conquer 64, a funny idea of mashing up Sim City and Command and Conquer. Build a city, but also have to defend it with your army and navy. Sounds a bit bonkers but could be a laugh. Ed thinks it sounds great, and mentions Civilization, which wasn't even on consoles in a big way then, on SNES in America apparently. Then there's Barrio Kart 64. This is a proper weird one. Someone wants a karting game with Barry Chuckle, from the Chuckle Brothers, as the main character, and Paul Chuckle as Luigi. And then all sorts of random famous people like Richie Bernard, Jeffrey Boycott, Yogi Bear and Aladdin in there too. The screenshot they've drawn is pretty funny, proper amateur effort. Ed reckons they are one of the oddest people to write into the magazine. Yeah, I'd say so too. Finally, Mr. T64, about a game where you play as Mr. T trying to stop Dr. Smith building a giant robot made of gold. Sounds like something straight out of Saturday morning cartoons. They suggest it plays like a 2D scrolling beat-em-up, with Mr. T shouting catchphrases. Madness, really. Looking at the pictures, there's a Star Fox 64 screenshot, a Super International Cricket screenshot, and then that hand-drawn Mario Kart 64 mock-up, which is a sight to behold. All in all, a good old letters page, full of readers' thoughts and some truly bizarre game ideas. Typical N64 magazine stuff. This page from the old N64 magazine looks like the letters page and an invention section, plus some thoughts on Mario Kart 64. First up are the bonus letters, where readers have written in. Someone called Colin Sales from Park Mains High School, in Erskine, is laying it on thick about how clever he is, which the Ed quickly shuts down with a sarcastic remark. Another letter discusses Bowser's famous line, with someone rightly correcting the misheard "So long me Bowser" to "So long King Bowser," or even "So long dear Bowser," showing we were all a bit confused back then. There's a bit of bickering about spelling, and someone asking about a Christmas issue and calendar. A reader named Gary Lockheed cheekily asks if the editor put his leg in the air in response to a previous letter, and then there is a moan about blisters from playing Mario 64, Wave Race and ISS 64. Ouch, those early N64 controllers were a bit brutal on the thumb sometimes. Matthew Garrett wants the magazine to splash something all over the front cover and news pages, but we don't know what. Then there is the invention corner, which is always good for a laugh. First up is the Virtue Rumble Pack. Some bloke called David Ashmore of Mosley has designed a rumble pack that straps all over your body mental. He thinks the standard rumble pack isn't violent enough and envisages being an all-over body jiggler. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, and the editor rightly suggests dental insurance might be needed. Next is the gripper pad for sweaty hands, which is pretty relatable. Those N64 controllers could get a bit slippery. This reader has made a rubber pad to stop your fingers sliding off the controller prongs. Finally, there's a controller holder. David Foreman from Bury St Edmunds reckons it would be easier to play if the controller was stuck to the table with suckers. Not sure about that one, sounds a bit restrictive. And lastly, someone called Alan Monaghan in Enniskillen has designed a Star Fox special controller for Lilac Wars, with extra buttons and force feedback. It's got surround sound speakers, and a projected price of £30, quite ambitious for a homemade joystick. Lastly, there's a section called Filleted about Mario Kart 64 shortcuts. Someone is complaining about being ripped off by Nintendo for buying a Nintendo 64 and then the price dropping, which was always a pain back then, and they're moaning about Mario Kart 64 shortcuts being a bit rubbish and glitchy, ruining time trials. They mention good shortcuts like the Mario Raceway and Koopa Troopa Beach ones, but say other tracks like Moo Moo Farm and Kalimari Desert are bad. They do praise Bowser's Castle and Banshee Boardwalk though, and they've found no evidence of unintentional shortcuts in Diddy Kong Racing yet. Always something to look out for. It mentions a time of 1.82 seconds on a track. Blimey, these guys were serious about their Mario Kart. This page from N64 Magazine looks like the letters page, so tell me this, where readers get to have their say and ask questions. Starting off, there's a letter titled Apologetic about the Hitachi HE25 plug recall for the N64 and SNES power supplies. Seems someone was lucky to have one and got a replacement deal from Nintendo, which was pretty decent of them, offering knockdown prices on stuff. Then there's underneath, about the magazine cover, and someone named Jonathan being editor. This reader liked the mag and was happy with it, saying they would be annoyed if Jonathan was sacked. Strong words. Chest is next. A bloke complaining about the random headings for the letters. Reckon he's got a point, they are a bit daft, aren't they? Keychains, ice creams, about 7. Things to slot, yeah, not sure what they're on about there. Following that, demographics. Seems like they're defending targeting the mag at younger gamers, saying Superplay was the inspiration. They are sticking with their current style, and asking if readers want more adult content. Bit of a debate there. The main bit is, so tell me this, the Q&A. First question is about the 64DD and memory expansion with the N64, and whether it will improve kart performance. Answer is basically no. Memory expansion is for loading chunks of data for the 64DD, not karts. T-Addy. Next, someone asks about Asdatal's Shockwave Rumble Pack working with Rumble Pack games. They say they are waiting for their Shockwave pack, but it should be switchable for both types of Rumble. Bit technical for a letters page. B. Question 3 is about Red Baron game, mentioned in issue 46 of Superplay. The answer is, Sierra's Red Baron flight sim got dropped. Shame, as the PC version was great, And an N64 World War I flight sim would have been good with analog stick and rumble. Yeah, that would have been something. Warinu. Question 4 asks about NHL games for the SNES and Lilat Wars without Rumble pack. Answer is nope to Lilat Wars without Rumble, and yes to NHL games on SNES. Fair enough. Question 5 is about special weapons in GoldenEye, and if they enhance the game. Answer is yes, Golden Gun and Moonraker Laser, but they tend to avoid them in multiplayer, as whoever gets the Golden Gun first usually wins. True that, Golden Gun was a game ender. Warrington Norsa. Last question is about add-on discs for the 64DD and stopping companies re-releasing games. Answer is yes, it will be possible, and this should stop rehashing of games. Mentioning EA as a culprit for re-releases. Cheeky. Truer. Then a separate question at the bottom from Colin Sales about Mario Kart 64 PAL versus US/JAP timing. He's got a time of 2 feet 0471 on Luigi Raceway PAL, and wants to know what it would be on import version. Ed works out the maths and says it would be around 1 foot 43 inches 92 on import. Says PAL is slightly slower but easier to judge corners. Interesting stuff for the speedrunners. Finally at the bottom left, another question about a one-timer shot in Wayne Gretzky's hockey like in EA games. Answer is yes, pressing A and B together. Simple as that. Void. Overall, a typical letters page. Bit of reader moaning, some techie questions about the N64 and 64DD, and some game-specific questions. Brings you back to the days of waiting for the post and reading these mags to get the inside scoop. This page depicts a typical contents page from N64 Magazine back in the day. Issue 10, it seems, must be Christmas '97, judging by the talk of New Year. Right at the top it's teasing issue 11, saying it's coming soon in big letters, and promising a look at the Nintendo Space World show from Tokyo. They are banging on about handsome reports of F-Zero X, Zelda, and something called the 64DD. Remember all the hype around the 64DD? Didn't quite pan out, did it? They also mention photos of loads of new games, and a chat with Nintendo boss Hiroshi Yamauchi, making it sound like you're actually there at the show, minus the jet lag, which is a nice touch. Koi. Then there's an index to this issue, issue 10. Let's have a gander. An ear to the ground. An Englishman in Tokyo, sounds like the usual fluff. Ah, a review of Automobili Lamborghini. Can't say I remember that one being a classic. Body Harvest preview. Now that's interesting, remember waiting ages for that one. From DMA Design, who became Rockstar North later. Chameleon Twist review. Club 64. Contents. Fair enough. Diddy Kong Racing review. Now that was a proper game, yeah, remember that being ace. Directory. Dream On. Dual Heroes preview. Duke Nukem 64 review. Blimey. Duke on the N64, that was a bit of alright. FIFA Road to World Cup review. Football game for Christmas, standard. Fighters Destiny preview. Forsaken. Future look. GASP. Fighters NEX Dream preview. Lots of previews in this issue. Help wanted. How to accessorize your N64. How to get your head around pocket monsters. Cheeky. Must be Pokemon they're on about. How to keep the British end up in GoldenEye 007. Bit of a weird title, but GoldenEye tips always welcome. How to triumph repeatedly in Lilat Wars battle mode. Star Fox 64 they mean. Lilat Wars. Always with the fancy names. I'm the best. Invention Corner. J-League 11. Beat 97 review. Lilat Wars Championship winners. Madden 64 vs NFL Quarterback Club 98. Sports games galore. Mario Artist news. NBA In the Zone 98 preview. Next issue. New goods. Nintendo Hotline. Space World 97 news. Puyo Puyo 64 review. SimCity 2000 preview. Spooky preview. So tell me this. Subscriptions. Super Mario 64 2 news. Wonder what that was about. Probably just rumors back then. The Legend of Zelda future look. Always with the Zelda teases. Tips extra? Tonic Trouble future look. Ultra release list. Phew, that's a lot of stuff. At the bottom, underneath a big plus free gift. They are excitedly talking about a free gift in issue 11, alongside a calendar, tempting us to rush out and get it on New Year's Eve. Very clever indeed. And right at the bottom it confirms issue 11 will be out Wednesday the 31st of December, New Year's Eve. So there you have it, Christmas '97, in N64 Magazine land. This page from N64 Magazine issue 10, Christmas 1997, is an advert for F1 pole position 64. In racing there is only one position, bit of a bold statement for a game on a console that was already getting a few decent races, wasn't it? They're pushing it as the most authentic Formula 1 experience, packed with all the official licenses and drivers from the '96 season, boasting 16 circuits and a load of tracks, even pit radio. The screenshots are, well, they're N64 screenshots. They looked alright on a CRT back in the day. A bit blurry now though. Packs. Looking at the reviews this issue section down the side, it's a proper Christmas games bonanza. Diddy Kong Racing was the big kart racer that year, trying to take on Mario Kart, pretty good game actually. Then the usual American sports games, Madden and NFL Quarterback, never really took off over here. Automobili Lamborghini sounded exotic, probably was a bit ropey. FIFA, Road to the World Cup, always a safe bet for Christmas. Duke Nukem 64 for the slightly older kids wanting some mild swearing and alien blasting, and Chameleon Twist, which I vaguely recall, platformer I think. The Other Great Stuff section is what you'd flick to next. Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time obviously, everyone was desperate for that one. Forsaken, that weird 3D tunnel shooter thing. Pocket Monsters, or Pokemon, as it became known over here. GoldenEye tips were essential if you wanted to have any cred in the playground arguments. Accessory guide, always a laugh to see what pointless bits of plastic they were trying to flog you. Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 to us Brits, Battle Mode Masterclass, and they even reviewed every N64 game released at that point, which must have been a right chore for Zai and the team. Ubisoft were clearly hoping this F1 game would be a Christmas hit. Yeah, pretty standard N64 magazine page from back then.